Hello, all. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
Great. It's a quiet group tonight.
We're having some difficulty.
Technology gremlins attacking again.
Yeah. Working on video.
Okay.
Good. Michelle and other OSBT folks, it's good to have you here. Dave, John.
Dave, I think you're on mute.
Hey, well, it's 6 o'clock, and it looks like we got our relevant people here. So, Elisha, are we recording?
Emily has started the recording now, sir.
Okay, very good. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 22nd, 2024 special joint meeting between the Boulder City Council and the Open Space Board of Trustees. I've got an announcement to make, then we're going to have a couple of declarations, and then we'll get on with business of the meeting. So the announcement tonight is about exploring the regional minimum wage. The cities of Boulder, Lafayette, Longmont, Louisville, and the town of Erie are collectively exploring a potential increase to the local minimum wage in their respective communities. Beginning this month, people are invited to engage virtually and in person with English and Spanish options available. People are invited to respond to the online questionnaire and participate in one of the many focus group sessions. Engagement opportunities are open now until April 15th. Visit the QR code to learn more. This announcement also comes in English and Spanish options. Los gobiernos locales de Boulder, Lafayette, Longmont, Louisville y Erie están explorando conjuntamente un posible aumento del salario mínimo local en sus comunidades respectivas. A partir de este mes, todos los miembros de la comunidad están invitados a participar virtualmente o en persona, con opciones tanto en inglés como en español. Les invitamos a responder al cuestionario en línea y a participar en alguna de las muchas sesiones de los grupos de enfoque. Estas oportunidades de participación tendrán lugar hasta el 15 de abril. Escanee el código QR para obtener más información. Okay, and with that, I will call us to order. Alicia, if you could do the roll call, please. And we're going to start with the council roll call, and then after the declarations, we'll do the OSBT roll call.
All right, thank you, and good evening, everyone. We'll start tonight's roll call with Councilmember Adams.
Present.
Benjamin.
Present.
Mayor Brockett.
Present.
Councilmember Volkerts.
Present.
Marquis.
Present.
Shuhart.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Spear.
Present.
Councilmember Wallach.
Present.
And Weiner.
Present.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Thanks so much, Alicia. All right, our first item is 1A, which is the Rare Disease Day Declaration to be presented by Councilmember Volkerts. Lauren, if you would, please.
Thank you, Aaron. Mayor Brockett. Is Lauren Rosenberg here to accept this declaration?
Yes, hi, I'm here.
Yay. Thank you for joining us this evening. So, Lauren Rosenberg is a founder of a local nonprofit called Sophie's Neighborhood and will be receiving the Rare Disease Day Declaration. After I read the declaration, I will invite Lauren to share some words with us this evening. Rare Disease Day, February 29th, 2024. There are 10,000 diseases and conditions considered rare, each affecting fewer than 200,000 Americans in the United States, according to the National Institutes of Health. While each of these diseases may affect a small number of people, rare diseases as a group affect almost 30 million, or 1 in 10 Americans. Many rare diseases are serious and debilitating conditions that have a significant impact on the lives of those affected. And living with a rare disease is made harder by the fact that there is often low profit potential for development of treatments for uncommon illnesses. Therefore, very little research is done. While hundreds of drugs and biologicals have been approved for the treatment of rare diseases according to the Food and Drug Administration, most of the known rare diseases are still without FDA-approved treatments. As such, millions of Americans still have rare diseases for which there is no approved treatment. Individuals and families affected by rare diseases often experience additional difficulties, such as a diagnosis delay, difficulty finding a medical expert, and lack of access to treatments or ancillary services. While the public is familiar with some rare diseases, many patients and families affected by less widely known rare diseases bear a large share of the burden of funding research and raising public awareness to support the search for treatments. The National Organization for Rare Disorders is organizing a nationwide observance of Rare Disease Day on February 29th, 2024. We, the City Council of Boulder, Colorado, declare February 29th, 2024 as Rare Disease Day and urge all community members to take cognizance of this event and participate fittingly in its observance. Thank you. Lauren, thank you for being with us again. Is there anything you would like to share with us?
Thank you so much for having me. That was a really fantastic recap of what people with rare diseases are facing in this country and around the world. So again, my name is Lauren Rosenberg, and I thank you, Mayor Brockett, and the city for allowing me to accept this declaration in honor of Rare Disease Awareness Day. My daughter, Sophie, currently a first grader at Foothill Elementary School, was diagnosed with an ultra-rare condition back on March 9th, 2020. Just before she was about to turn 3 years old. It was a couple of years of head scratching until the most extensive genetic tests available revealed that she had an ultra-rare bone and kidney disease that came with no treatment and no hope for any. We were told that she was among 30 to 50 people worldwide with this condition. And that over time, progressively, her symptoms would worsen. Her bones would not form properly through the course of development, and her kidneys would deteriorate over time, eventually leading to dialysis and stage kidney failure. And this is what we were told. Obviously, we were deep despair, but we picked ourselves up, and my husband and I, being entrepreneurs, based here in Boulder, started our 501c3 called Sophie's Neighborhood and got to work. And ever since, we have been able to change her fate significantly. And it was the uplifting that came from the support of Boulder, this community here, including our incredible life sciences industry and university, along with local businesses and just wonderful kind-hearted, supportive people that enabled our foundation to get off the ground. And to date, we have raised nearly $2 million over the last 4 years, and we're funding quite a bit of scientific research globally that's impacting Sophie's life in real time, as well as helping the lives of others that previously had no hope. So it's just so important to me that as many people as possible are aware of the fact that there are so many millions of people worldwide affected by rare diseases, despite having disease states that are individually rare. So thank you again. We've been spending this month really highlighting Rare Disease Day, and we appreciate all the support and look forward to seeing the colors of Rare Disease Day shine on the courthouse on Pearl Street on Thursday. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for joining us and for doing that important work.
Yes, Lauren, thank you for sharing your powerful story and for everything that you're doing to raise awareness and to assist people with those rare diseases. It's incredibly impressive. So just very grateful for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
And with that, we will move to our next declaration, which is the item 1B, the 20th anniversary of the Boulder International Film Festival declaration, to be presented by Councilmember Schuhard. So Ryan, if you would do that, please. You're on mute.
Good, Ryan.
Try again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor Brockett. And if I could also thank Lauren again for being here, and Lauren for your bravery and your leadership. Community of Boulder is lucky to have you, and so glad you're here to receive the declaration. Do we have Kathy Beek here to receive this declaration? Oh, there you are, Kathy. Great. Okay. So I will make the declaration, my first declaration, and then invite you to say words.
Sounds good.
So, great. Okay, so I am so honored to present this declaration. This year, the Boulder International Film Festival is celebrating 20 years of inspiration, entertainment, and community as an indispensable part of Boulder's arts and culture landscape. Named one of the 25 coolest film festivals in the world by Movie Maker magazine, the Boulder International Film Festival brings films, filmmakers, special guests, award-winning actors, and musicians from around the world to Boulder for a 4-day celebration of the art of cinema. The Boulder International Film Festival attracts more than 25,000 film enthusiasts, media, and industry professionals to Boulder each year and has been proud to host and celebrate some of the film's most talented artists. In addition to providing cultural and artistic experiences for residents and visitors, Boulder International Film Festival serves as a tremendous community partner. The BIF provides free programming to seniors through their senior outreach program, to youth through their educational outreach program, which includes free screenings at BIF and a teen short film competition. Their call to action program gives a platform to local nonprofits who advocate for the world's most pressing social and environmental issues to engage with these challenges through the art of film. The BIF has featured close to 200 local nonprofits at the festival since the call to action program began, and its dedication to social and environmental resilience reflects its commitment to the values of Boulder's community. This year, the City Council and organizers of the Boulder International Film Festival invite all community members to participate in this year's festivities, including free virtual film screenings leading up to the in-person festival, a free community day during the festival at E-Town featuring BIF classics, free cake on the Saturday of the festival, much more. The main venue for the BIF in 2024 will again be the historic Boulder Theater in downtown Boulder, among many other venues, and people can also participate by attending the BIF at home virtual festival from March 4th to March 17th. For a full lineup of films and activities, please visit bif1.com. We, the City Council of the City of Boulder, Colorado, declare February 29th, March 3rd, 2024 as Boulder International Film Festival's 20th anniversary. Kathy, can I invite you to say any words?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan. I'm honored to accept that declaration on behalf of myself and my sister, who co-founded the festival with me, Robin, and all of our volunteers and everybody who has put so much into this festival. This year, we are in celebration of our 20th anniversary. It's a give back to the community because we literally could not put on this festival without the support of sponsors and donors and attendees and volunteers and filmmakers from all over. So to be celebrating our 20th year is really exciting for us. It just seems like we started it yesterday sometime when we think about it. We started it in 2005 and we were filmmakers and we thought Boulder really needed something like this festival. So we've just had a blast doing it ever since. You mentioned that we do have some community events, some free films this year for people at E-Town on Saturday during the festival. And you mentioned the birthday cake. We're doing a few other things as well to celebrate our 20th. And I just wanted to point out that, we have 4 sponsors of the festival who have been with us since the very, very beginning, since that year 1. And those sponsors are the St. Julian Hotel and the Allegra Printing and the City of Boulder. And there's one other one. I knew I was going to forget one of them. But I just wanted to thank the City of Boulder because even in our very first year when we had never held a festival, the city came on with support as a sponsor. And every single year after that has done everything they can to help support us, whether it's through grants or sponsorships. Always when we needed anything, the city stepped up. And we just want to say a big special thank you to the City of Boulder for helping us get to this 20th year. We have a really fantastic lineup. You might see these around town. It's the program. And I encourage you to pick it up and read it. It's 74 films from, I think, 30 different countries. We have 50 filmmakers coming into town this year. So a really strong group of people coming in to share their films and their stories. And we're really excited. We hope that we see all of you at the festival. It's next weekend. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Kathy, to you and the team for your 2 decades of service. And we all look forward to seeing you starting next weekend.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much, Kathy, for joining us. And what a milestone. So exciting. I've got the program on my kitchen table right now, and I'm picking and choosing which ones I'll be at. So can't wait to see you at the festival.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. See you there.
See you there. Teresa?
Thanks, Erin. So before the OSBT convenes, there's a matter I wanted to bring to council's attention for potential action should council so choose. The Boulder Revised Code, section 275, subsection E, provides that no former public official shall appear before or participate in the body where they served within 1 year of their service. That's relevant this evening because Karen Hallwig is signed up to speak at tonight's joint public hearing. Ms. Hallwig served on the OSBT, and it's not yet been a year of time elapsed since her service. Therefore, she's ineligible to speak before the OSBT. However, section 2-7-5E does provide that the prohibition can be waived by the city council by a vote. In this circumstance, it's an unusual circumstance because we have a joint meeting and Ms. Hallwig would like the right to be able to address council and isn't able to do so without jointly addressing the OSBT tonight. So I wanted to advise council of this matter in case you wanted to take up the exception. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much for drawing our attention to that, Teresa. I appreciate it. I personally would certainly welcome the opportunity to give Karen a chance to speak to City Council. So I'd be open to that. Teresa, what would you need specifically? Would it be a motion? So could you be specific? Do you mind?
Yes, absolutely. It would require a motion to waive the prohibition of BRC section 2-7-5E with respect to Ms. Hallwig, Karen Hallwig, for this evening for the joint public hearing of the OSBT and City Council.
Very good. Council members, does anybody have a question or comment on that, or want to make a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion. Or
I couldn't hear who said that.
Tara.
Okay, Tara, and then I got Mark. Oh, go ahead, Tara.
No, I said I would make a motion. I don't have any questions.
Okay. Feel free to go ahead.
Just a quick question. How close to the 1 year is it?
I believe that her term expired at the end of March. So I believe we're approximately a month from when that year would elapse.
Excuse me, Teresa, I think it was March 2023, right? Yes. Right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
I would be inclined to follow Mayor Brockett's lead on this.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Mark. Tara, did you want to make that motion?
Sure. I make a motion to waive the provisions of BRC section 2-7-2E with respect to Ms. Holwig for the joint public hearing tonight. Is that good enough? Yeah, okay.
I'll second.
Very good. Motion and a second. Seeing no other hands raised. Alicia, this raise show of hands vote? Yes, okay. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, I believe that's unanimous. Very good. Ms. Holwig can speak to us tonight in the public hearing. Thanks for taking us through that, Teresa. Okay, so tonight's public hearing item, as we mentioned before, is being held jointly with City Council and the Open Space Board of Trustees and involves the request from the City Utilities Department for the ongoing use and management of an approximately 2.2 acre portion of the OSMP Van Fleet Vliet property needed to construct and maintain elements of the South Boulder Creek flood mitigation project. So if I could now ask OSBT Board Chair Dave Kuntz to do a roll call for the OSBT.
Thank you, Mayor Brockett. I will call the roll of the Open Space Board of Trustees. Board Member Zuckerman.
I'm here.
Board Member Estrella.
Present.
And Board Member Carroll.
Present.
And I am Dave Kuntz, and I am present. And so we do have a quorum. Brady Robinson is out of the country and will be absent.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Dave. Welcome again to our distinguished OSBT board members.
Thank you.
Elisha, if you could read the item into the record so we can get started, please. And
You're
Elisha,
muted.
You're muted.
Brain's moving still a little slow. My apologies. Our public hearings are item number 3 on tonight's agenda. 3A is the consideration of a request from the City of Boulder's Utilities Department to use and manage an approximately 2.2 acre portion of the Van Vliet open space property to construct, access, operate, and maintain elements of the South Boulder Creek flood mitigation project pursuant to the disposal procedures of Article 12, Section 177 of the City of Boulder Charter and related matters.
Very good, thank you. So this item will begin with a staff presentation and recommendation, which will be followed by any clarifying questions that City Council or OSBT may have. And after those clarifying questions, I'll open the public hearing for testimony. And after the testimony portion of the public hearing is closed, there'll be an opportunity for any last clarifying questions from council members or trustees. The mayor, myself, and the OSBT board chair will then seek motions to continue this public hearing item on upcoming meeting dates in March. As a reminder, neither the council nor board will be deliberating or making a decision on this item at tonight's meeting. The deliberations and decisions will come at those meetings in March. And with that, can I hand things over to you, Nuria, to get things kicked off, please?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mayor. And hello to the Open Space Board of Trustees, which we don't get to see in these kind of meetings. I appreciate your reminder, Mr. Mayor, that we are not asking for decisions to be made tonight, as we know there is such tremendous community interest in this item, and appreciate the thoughtful questions both bodies may have as you hear more in our presentation. And while we know this is just the beginning of the process, as there are many moving parts in what is really, truly a very complex project, it's exciting for us as staff to come before you now on the South Boulder Creek Flood Mitigation Project, as we are at the 60% stage of design. And one of the critical next steps in this project is the consideration of the disposal of 2.2 acres of open space parcel of land that is needed to support the flood mitigation work. I'll note too, as so many of you already know, that decades of analysis and engagement work has occurred to get us to the place we are right now. And I want to appreciate the thoughtful way in which our staff had moved this work forward, keeping flood mitigation and safety at the forefront of their work, while also thinking very intentionally about how to mitigate and monitor any potential impacts this work may have on our wetlands and the various habitats that are home to some of our threatened species in the area and other species that present some conservation concerns to both staff and our community. With that, I'll turn it over to our Director of Open Space and Mountain Parks, Dan Burke, and our Director of Utilities, Joe Tadeucci, who will kick this off, but want to also appreciate not just the work of our utilities and OSMP staff, but the work other departments, particularly folks in planning and development services and in our city attorney's office, although there are more across the organization, have really provided over the years. This has been an extraordinarily heavy lift on a variety of fronts, and we look forward to hearing from you and our community. So I will kick it off to Dan, if you could take us forward.
Great. Well, thank you, Nuria, and good evening, council members, and good evening, trustees. It's nice seeing you all together. As Nuria said, my name is Dan Burke. I'm the Director of the Open Space and Mountain Parks Department, and I'll be joined by Joe Tadeucci from Utilities Department to provide some introductory remarks before we begin the formal presentation. And since both the board and the council need to consider and approve this transfer of land request, I just want to thank both bodies for the opportunity to simultaneously address the group. It's a great opportunity to do that. And before we dive into the presentation, I just want to take a moment to introduce you all to the staff who will be supporting tonight's presentation. So in addition to Joe and I, you will be hearing from Brandon Coleman from the City Utilities Department, as well as Bethany Collins and Don D'Amico from Open Space and Mountain Parks. I just wanted to call that team out because this is really the core team that since 2020, when City Council gave direction to begin design of this particular flood mitigation project, a small portion of which will need to be located on open space managed land, that this team has spent hundreds and hundreds of hours working together in pursuit of a common goal that we collectively set out for our two departments. And that goal is really in two parts. First is to design a project that minimizes to the greatest extent possible impacts to open space and mountain parks land. And second, in order to address any avoidable impacts to open space, to identify and develop comprehensive mitigation and restoration plans that will significantly benefit the open space system in this area in the long term. Joe and I share the opinion that staff has successfully achieved that goal. Tonight, staff will summarize the request open space received from the City Utilities Department for the ongoing use and management of approximately 2.2 acres of open space land needed to support the South Boulder Creek flood mitigation project, along with the temporary use of approximately 1.9 acres of OSMP land needed only during the construction phase of the project. Staff will then also provide an overview of how the project plans to address, through mitigation and restoration, any permanent and temporary impacts to open space. These plans include adding significant lands and water rights to the OSMP portfolio, as well as a plan to undertake one of the largest wetland restoration projects in the City of Boulder's history. As Bethany will later explain in the presentation, the utilities request for the ongoing use and management of approximately 2.2 acres of open space needs to be approved through the disposal process that is described in section 177 of the city charter. And in addition to adhering to charter provisions, open space staff considered this transfer of land request by following OSMP's guidance for license and disposal requests. This is a document that has been endorsed by the Board of Trustees and that outlines the information that staff needs to adequately assess disposal requests that come into our department. So with that, we have a few more introductory remarks, but I'll have Joe come on and to provide us a few more introductory remarks before we get started. Joe, take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Hopefully everyone can hear me, and good evening, City Council members and Board of Trustees. I'm Joe Tadiucci, the Director of the Utilities Department. And as has been mentioned, tonight we're here and focused on the open space disposal process for the South Boulder Creek flood mitigation project. It's a project that's been in the making for years and years, and we're really down to the final month or so of city board and council process and all of the associated recommendations and approvals that go with that. As many people know, our organization has gone through some staff transition in the past several years, including members of this project team. However, as Dan covered in his introductions, our primary presenters tonight have all had key roles on this project for several years. And it has really been great to work with Dan and his team the past many years, and it has really been a true partnership. And as Nuria mentioned in her opening remarks, it's not just open space and utilities. So many departments have supported the project that we're working on, the city manager's office, city attorney's office, the planning and development service, and many others. And it has been really great to see everyone work together for common goals that are really bigger than any of our individual departments. And while for the utilities department, the flood protection and the associated life safety is a central and critical goal, equally important is protecting the environment. And Dan touched on some of the ways that we're going about that, but our project team has worked hard to minimize the flood project impacts on city open space. Originally, when we landed on the current design alternative, we were talking about 5 acres of permanent impact and disposal potentially. And the team has really been focused as we come up to this 60% design point on reducing that to 2.2 acres. For those environmental impacts that are unavoidable, tonight you'll hear about mitigation and restoration plans designed to offset those impacts. And we know that maintaining groundwater flows has been an item of high community interest. And tonight, again, you'll hear about a long-term monitoring plan to ensure that the flood project's groundwater conveyance system operates as designed. And Brandon, if you want to start bringing up the slides, I'll wrap up here in a second. And I'll be turning it over to Brandon next. But before I do, I also just want to acknowledge and thank City Council and the various boards, including the Board of Trustees, as well as the community, for the input that we have received over the years. There have been many, many meetings and late nights, and we appreciate everyone continuing to follow what we're doing. And with respect to the community, we definitely know there are mixed views on the project, but hopefully people can see how their input has positively shaped what we are planning here, regardless of their overall views. And Brandon, if you want to go to the next slide. So I will be turning it over to Brandon Coleman, who is our utilities project manager for this, engineering project manager. He'll talk about the flood project, and Bethany will talk about the land transfer details. Don D'Amico will talk about the mitigation project and monitoring plan, and then Dan and I will wrap things up at the end. So with that, Brandon, I think I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Joe, and everybody. Good evening, Council. I'm Brandon Coleman. I'm the engineering project manager in the storm flood utility, and I'll be going over a little bit of background on the flood mitigation project and the components of that project. So first, I just want to start for what the need for the project is. So South Boulder Creek is one of 16 major drainage ways that run through the city, and we're responsible for flood management and mitigation through those 16 drainage ways. South Boulder Creek has flooded historically through the city. Some of the major flood events were in 1938, 1969, and most recently in 2013. The photo in the middle here is from Thunderbird Apartments along Thunderbird Lane from the 1969 flood. And then the photo on the right is from Koala Drive in 2013 and really speaks to the need and the importance of this project. So as Joe mentioned, the real goal of this project is protection of life and safety. And this image here is a picture of the South Boulder Creek floodplain. And you'll see a diagonal road running across the middle of this figure. That's US 36. And the outlined area, that's the South Boulder Creek floodplain. And there's also a dashed line that denotes the CU South property. And the purpose of this project is really focused on mitigating flooding that leaves the main channel of South Boulder Creek and overtops US 36 around the Table Mesa Park and Ride, and then flows through the city, through the Fraser Meadows neighborhood, Keewada Meadows, and also the East Boulder neighborhoods. As you've heard, this project does have a long history. I'll pick it up, and this project has followed a life cycle approach that we use as a utility. So the first step in our flood mitigation is really floodplain mapping, and that started in about 2004, 2003 for the South Boulder Creek floodplain. And that mapping effort was accepted as a regulatory floodplain in about 2010. And the mapping really identifies the flood risk. So that's where we identified this overtopping flow and the need for mitigation. So from that mapping effort, we moved to flood mitigation planning, and mitigation planning is really looking at a system-wide flood approach for South Boulder Creek specifically in this case, and also comparing multiple different alternatives to identify the best alternative for flood mitigation within a major drainage way. So through that process, we developed the South Boulder Creek Major Drainage Way Plan, and that was accepted in 2015. And as you saw, CU South is a key location for where flooding happens and where overtopping of US 36 occurs. And that mitigation plan identified a regional detention facility on the CU South property. So recognizing that, we moved into developing the Boulder Valley Comp Plan, the guiding principles for how the CU South property would be approached with the flood mitigation as a key component of that. And following the acceptance of those of the update to the Boulder Valley Comp Plan in 2017, we moved into design. And as you've heard, we've been in design since 2017, 2018. We're glad we've gotten to a 60% design stage and really felt now was the right time to bring forth this request. So, there we go. So next, I'll just go through some of the major components of that phase one from the flood mitigation plan, which is this regional detention facility upstream of US 36. So first, to create the detention, we're gonna, this area shows an area where we're gonna use an earthen embankment, and that will actually detain the flood waters. And that'll be along the CU South property. Next, to create the volume we need for detention during a 100-year flood, this area would be an area of excavation where we would create that detention volume. Then next, we have an outlet work. So the facility will only hold water during a flooding event, and the outlet works will discharge to Veely Channel, which ultimately discharges back to South Boulder Creek in a safe way as to not increase downstream flooding. And what we'll be talking about a lot tonight is this spillway. It will also be referred to as a flood wall. So it's really a concrete wall that parallels US 36 to create that detention that I was discussing. And that's where it is located on open space. And we'll be talking more about that through the night. And then the other component that you'll hear about tonight is this area of the CU South property. It's been denoted as OSO, which is open space other, but it comprises about 119 acres that we've been focusing on for our environmental mitigation area and also a restoration area. And it's a historic part of the historic South Boulder Creek floodplain as well. So maps are helpful, but they're not always great for visualization. So we did create this rendering to help people visualize what's going to happen. So it starts, we are looking northwest across the US 36 bridge over South Boulder Creek. And I'm going to hit play here. And what you'll see is really the flooding being detained by our spillway and flood wall in the foreground here. And then our outlet structure, which comes under US 36 and then discharges to Veely Channel. And you can see the flood wall in the back there. And as the flood wall gets closer to the CU South property, it transitions to that earthen embankment, which is shown in green here. And you'll see another large area of fill, that's South Loop Drive. So the existing road to the property will need to be elevated over our facility. So that's just a general overview of the facility and kind of helps you visualize. This is showing the floodwaters, but as I mentioned before, it won't hold water unless it's actually flooding, and then post flood, it will actually drain completely. So to get into the design details a little bit, we've really focused on the 60% design of developing the details around the spillway and flood wall in coordination with open space to really define the area that we need for this transfer request. So the spillway consists of a concrete wall, and this is very busy. This is part of the design drawing, so I'll just hit some of the key components here. The concrete spillway / flood wall we'll be talking about. You also see the CDOT right-of-way. There will be a downstream spillway apron to address any groundwater issues. And also for any flows above the 100-year flood, they would overtop this spillway, so protecting that downstream edge. And then you'll see underneath there's a groundwater collection system, which I'll discuss further. And then on the upstream side of the wall, we have about a 14-foot maintenance road. And this also includes a secant pile wall foundation that is designed to cut off groundwater, and then the groundwater conveyance system would safely move that water across that foundation as to not impact the wetlands upstream and downstream of the facility, and really mimic the natural movement of groundwater. So this is a rendering. This is another thing we've been thinking about through the 60% design, and this is really for visual impacts of the wall. So we did select a concrete spillway flood wall to minimize the footprint as much as we could. So that's the tightest corridor we can think of, is to have a vertical wall. But on the downstream side of the wall, adjacent to US 36, we're looking at proposing fill to go on that downstream side. And this really helps for the visual aesthetics and also to reduce any potential vandalism to the wall. So I mentioned the groundwater conveyance system, and just in general, I'll speak at a very high level about the groundwater conveyance system. We have done a lot of work of groundwater modeling to understand the groundwater conditions and also to be able to size this piece of the design. So on the left-hand side of the screen, this is our groundwater collection trench. So essentially this will collect any groundwater on the upstream side of our spillway. And then as that groundwater gets collected, we'll have a series of pipes and manholes that penetrate our foundation wall to move groundwater across that cutoff in a safe manner. And then on the downstream side, we'd have a groundwater distribution trench. So rather than having the groundwater discharge to open air, we would want it to go back into the native soil as it would have historically. So that's really the fundamentals of how the groundwater conveyance system works. And it would also have valving. So based on groundwater monitoring around the facility, we'd be able to adjust that in the future as needed. This figure here also shows the outlet works. So I mentioned the tunnel under US 36. I wanted to highlight this because this is something we've worked with Open Space on as well, as we were able to realign our outlet works closer to the CDOT right-of-way, and we were able to minimize our impacts for this disposal request by doing this alignment shown here, which is shown in our 60% design documents as well. So this is just a really high level vision of the schedule. I'm just going to talk through a few things here. This isn't all the items we have to deal with, but this is really a high level summary of the design, and then also some of the key permits that we need to get. So you'll see we're here today. We've completed our 60% design. That's also been posted to the website for the public. And then we're moving into 90% design. And then as you go below the 90% design, you'll see we're already working with CDOT on a special use permit, but having the definition from this spillway flood wall alignment will allow us to better discuss the impacts to the CDOT right of way through those negotiations. So the next permit underneath there is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is our federal nexus, because we will have some impacts to waters of the U.S. And they're a key component of this because they are also reviewing our environmental impacts and also our mitigation requirements, including consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife for threatened and endangered species. So this spillway is in a very highly sensitive environmental area. So it's really important we have it designed for these discussions. So that way we can identify our impacts and also get the appropriate mitigation requirements from the Army Corps of Engineers and Fish and Wildlife. And then the next line under there is the State Engineers Dam Safety Office. And the spillway is a key hydraulic component of the design. And we need that to stay relatively the same, so that way we can review that design and the hydraulics of the facility, including our outlet works pipe sizing and also overtopping flows of anything greater than 100-year flood. And then the next 3 lines are all associated with floodplain regulations and floodplain permitting. And as I mentioned before, this is going to have a large impact on the floodplain. We'll essentially be cutting off that 100-year flooding flow through those neighborhoods I mentioned previously, and that's going to require approval from FEMA, who is the federal agency that oversees floodplains. Also, the city has floodplain regulations as well, and then Boulder County floodplain will be reviewing this. So having this wall defined at 60% is key to being able to move those permits forward. And then throughout this whole process, we've been collaborating with Open Space, which has been great. And we're really at a point where we have the footprint defined, the wall alignment defined, and our impacts defined. So that's why we're here talking about this disposal decision moving forward. And you'll see as we move through this, we're getting close to a construction start date in early 2025. And that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Bethany.
Thanks, Brandon. Can everybody hear me? All right. So next up, we're going to go through some of the utilities request details, the transfer request details. And let's go to the next slide, Brandon. So as Joe and Dan introduced, on December 15th, 2023, Open Space and Mountain Park staff received a request from City Utilities Department for the use of OSMP managed land to support the construction and maintenance of the South Boulder Creek Flood Mitigation Project. The request described the portions of open space property needed for temporary and ongoing use for the flood project, the proposed dedication of land and water rights to OSMP, and mitigation, restoration, and monitoring plans to address flood project impacts. Next slide. So let's get our bearings a little bit first. The open space property we're discussing is part of a large complex of properties north and south of US 36 acquired from the Van Vliet family in the late 1970s and referred to by OSMP staff as the Van Vliet Open Space or Van Vliet South. The area related to this request is located generally within the blue oval on this map, just south of the highway and east of the approximately 300 acres CU South property owned by the University of Colorado. Next slide. The utilities request centers on the proposed transfer of control, use, and management of an approximately 2.2 acre portion of the Van Vliet open space property along the US 36 CDOT right-of-way, shown in blue here. Next slide. This area is needed by utilities to accommodate a portion of the flood mitigation infrastructure described by Brandon, including access for its ongoing maintenance and management. And that's the area that he showed in his, I've put a rectangle around a portion of the area he showed in his diagram to denote what the transfer area really involves. The location of the spillway infrastructure is necessitated by the site topography, including the elevation of US 36, as well as the location of the existing utilities. Next slide. So we use the term transfer interchangeably with disposal in the memo in this presentation because title to all open space land is held by the City of Boulder, not specifically by OSMP. So this request is to transfer use and management to another city department. This is usually accomplished or is accomplished by an interdepartmental agreement or what we will phrase an IDMOU. But as outlined in BRC 8811, the transfer between departments must still comply with the disposal procedures set forth in Article 12, Section 177 of the City of Boulder's Charter and other related charter and code provisions, as you can see on the screen. The IDMOU used for this disposal will provide provisions for the transfer of the ongoing use and management of the transfer area to utilities, as well as the acquisition of the OSO site and water rights for OSMP management, and general terms and requirements related to the use of the temporary construction area and the OSO site for the mitigation site, all of which we'll discuss soon. It will also include provisions for reversion if the flood project is not constructed or if the transfer area is no longer used or needed by utilities for the flood project in the future. Next slide. So additionally, approximately 1.9 acres of the open space property, shown in red here, will be needed temporarily for construction and then be restored by utilities and remain under the management of OSMP. Next slide. This area is needed for temporary access and equipment and material staging during construction of the spillway, outlet works, and groundwater conveyance system. And it's shown in the red rectangle again here. The use of this temporary construction area will be formalized via a separate IDMOU and include provisions for minimizing disturbance and full restoration by utilities under the guidance of OSMP staff, which will have warranty periods for revegetation and weed control. This temporary agreement does not require OSBT or council action. Next slide. If the transfer of the use and management of the approximately 2.2 acre transfer area is approved and the flood project is also able to be fully approved, the land transfer elements of the CU South annexation agreement will become available, which includes conveyance of 155 acres of the CU South property to the city, with 80 acres being at no cost and an additional 75 acres to be paid for using utilities funds. The flood project requires about 36 acres of this land, and the remaining 119 will be designated for OSMP management for open space purposes. These 119 acres are what's known as the OSO site due to their Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan designation as open space other. And this is the area that is planned to be used by utilities for the mitigation of the flood project impacts. In addition to this OSO site, 30.2 ditch shares of Dry Creek Ditch Number 2 water rights will be acquired by the city from CU and managed by OSMP to support the mitigation project and allow for future management and irrigation needs within the ditches service area. While the OSO site and water rights will be under the general management of OSMP, utilities will have the performance obligations associated with the mitigation project in the OSO site until the restoration and regulatory and contractual requirements related to the flood project are completed. Again, the CU South Annexation Agreement outlines specific milestones for conveyance of these land and water rights. And of particular importance here for emphasis is that the city cannot acquire land and water rights from CU until utilities has a fully approved flood mitigation project. And since the flood project requires the 2.2 acre portion of open space land, approval of this transfer will allow the permitting and land conveyances to progress. Next slide. Moving on to how the request has been reviewed within the framework of OSMP's license and disposal guidance. For OSMP staff to provide a recommendation on a disposal or transfer request, we consider the impacts and benefits to the open space land, charter purposes, and resources, as well as to the general public, what alternatives may be available, how impacts might be mitigated or restored, and other site or project-specific information consistent with the department's license and disposal guidance. Here I'll summarize some of the information assembled in the context of the guidance. Next slide, please. Some of the impacts that have been identified to be associated with the transfer request include 2.2 acres of open space land transferred for use and management by utilities for placement of utility infrastructure, 1.9 acres of open space land temporarily disturbed during construction, but then restored, resource impacts including wetlands, habitat for threatened species, and scenic and viewshed impacts, and the alteration of the existing public use patterns on the approximately 155 acres of the CU South property that will be conveyed to the city due to the construction activities associated with the flood and mitigation projects. For example, the CU levee, which currently supports a walking trail used by the public under CU ownership, will be removed as part of the mitigation project. Next slide. Some of the benefits identified to be associated with the transfer include acquisition of the 119 acre OSO site shown in the blue oval in the lower right picture to be restored and managed for open space purposes, acquisition of 30.2 shares of Dry Creek Ditch Number 2 water rights to be used for the mitigation project and other open space purposes, flood protection for Boulder residents and structures as described by Brandon, addition of significant acreage to the OSMP system in the South Boulder Creek floodplain, and establishing floodplain connectivity, reducing habitat fragmentation, and improved hydrological function by removing the existing flood levee. The levee area is shown in red on the map on the upper left-hand side of this slide, and also in the yellow on the lower right. Next slide. Under the license and disposal guidance, where impacts will occur, the request must detail how mitigation and/or restoration might be possible. In this case, some temporary impacts within the 1.9 acre construction footprint will be restored under OSMP guidance. Excuse me, all temporary impacts. Additionally, contouring and restoration that can occur on the US 36 side and visual design or painting of the OSMP side of the flood wall will help mitigate scenic viewshed impacts. Also, the impacts to wetlands and upland habitat will be mitigated on the OSO site in coordination with OSMP staff, as Don will detail next. This use of the OSO site by utilities for the mitigation project is contingent on the disposal of the transfer area to utilities and the designation of OSMP management of the OSO site, and will be guided by an IDMOU that includes details related to the mitigation design and construction, as well as the monitoring of the groundwater conveyance system and mitigation project success. It will also include adaptive management options for the groundwater conveyance system. Again, this type of IDMOU does not require board or council action. So now we're on to Don to provide more information on the mitigation project and monitoring plans I've just mentioned.
Thanks, Bethany. So I'm going to talk a bit about the mitigation project and our monitoring plan moving forward. Environmental mitigation is required by regulatory agencies to compensate for the unavoidable loss of resources as a result of the flood project. In this case, the regulated resources include wetlands regulated by the City of Boulder and Preble's meadow jumping mouse and Euclades tresses orchid habitat regulated by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through the Endangered Species Act. Mitigation independent of that required in environmental permits is also a condition of transfer of open space land to utilities. These requirements will increase the amount of habitat created, restored, or enhanced beyond what is typically set by city code and federal regulations. Next slide. So this table, which is table 3 in your memo, shows the resources affected by the project and what is required to mitigate for those unavoidable losses from the project. The important column to look at here is the last column, which shows that our mitigation project will create additional habitat above what is required through permitting. So for example, as you can see in the first row under Boulder wetlands, we will be creating an additional 24.5 acres of wetlands to compensate for the loss of 6.1 acres, which is above that required by the city based on the acreage impacted and the ratio of required mitigation. And through the mitigation planning process, we decided to maximize wetland acreage created, which happened to reduce the amount of wetland buffer created, which is shown here as negative 0.7 acres in the last column. Next slide, please. So the list of important environmental resources in the project area is extensive. I mentioned the 2 species listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, Preble's meadow jumping mouse and Euclades tresses orchid. And there are other species of conservation concern, including northern leopard frogs, bobolink, which is a grassland nesting bird species in decline, and plains top minnow, which are found in South Boulder Creek and are a species of concern in the Colorado State Wildlife Action Plan. The area also has some of the most productive agricultural lands in the OSMP system, with hay production and grazing being the primary uses. In a nod to the ecological diversity and unique species and communities in the South Boulder Creek floodplain, the State of Colorado Natural Areas Program designated South Boulder Creek as a state natural area in 1999. Next slide. So using data collected over the years by open space staff and supplemented with recent resource surveys by the city's consultants, we prepared this resource inventory map to identify important resources in the project area, both on open space land and on the CU property. So this map shows the various plant communities, wetlands, orchid habitat, and Preble's habitat in the project area. We use this information in project planning for everything from providing a detailed understanding of where all the resources are found, to permitting, to developing our mitigation plan. Next slide. Figure 4 in the memo shows the area along US 36 where the impacts on open space will occur. Inset here is table 1 from the memo, which shows temporary and permanent impacts to these resources as a result of the project. And we focused a lot of our attention on the area along US 36 where many of the resources I mentioned previously are located and where the spillway is proposed to be built. Open space and utility staff have been working with the consultants to reduce impacts to open space resources by doing everything from realigning the spillway to be closer to the CDOT right of way, to identifying construction methods and phasing to further reduce impacts. Next slide. We've also been working with the city's consultants to design mitigation to compensate for impacts that are unavoidable. We started out by developing goals that we use to guide us through the design process. These include creating and enhancing existing wetlands to create a really diverse wetland complex in the mitigation area, creating or enhancing existing upland habitat, including potential habitat for prebbles and Lady's Trusses orchid, and removing the existing levee to increase ecological connectivity throughout the area. This diagram graphically shows the design elements of the mitigation project. The majority of the mitigation will occur within the existing levee in an old gravel quarry, which was mined from about the 1950s all the way through the 1990s. It's a highly disturbed area due to the rearrangement and removal of much of the alluvial floodplain soil and associated vegetation. And we've attempted to recreate natural features and habitats that existed prior to gravel mining and that are common to floodplains along the Front Range of Colorado. These include wet meadows, willow shrublands, emergent marshes, and native grasslands arranged in a matrix to maximize habitat for species that I mentioned before and others. A really important part of the project will be to remove the flood control levee on the CU property. And it'll be removed to reduce fragmentation of habitat between existing open space land and the mitigation area, and also just to improve overall floodplain connectivity. Next slide. Monitoring is also required as a condition in environmental permits. It's necessary to ensure that the mitigation is meeting the project goals. And monitoring falls into two kind of broad categories: regulatory monitoring as dictated by our environmental permits, and monitoring required in that will be required in the IDMOU, and specifically related to the groundwater conveyance system. It's going to be really critical to maintain groundwater hydrology in the area because hydrology is the driving factor in the maintenance of wetlands and other habitats in the floodplain. The groundwater conveyance system is designed to allow groundwater to flow freely through the spillway foundation through a series, as you heard, a series of underground pipes built into the secant pile wall, basically the foundation of the spillway. Open space staff is currently developing a monitoring plan for the system that includes a statistically robust study design meant to identify whether there are any changes to open space resources above and below US 36 that can be attributed to the project. We've narrowed it down to what's called a before and after control and impact study, where we establish vegetation plots in the groundwater influence area and also in a control area outside the area of influence. So we'll monitor vegetation, groundwater, and other resources before and after the project is built to see if we're seeing any statistically or ecologically significant changes to open space resources. And we plan on having everything in place to begin monitoring early this summer before groundbreaking for the project begins. In the unlikely event that the groundwater conveyance system doesn't operate as designed, we'll incorporate adaptive management to correct any deficiencies in the system. Some options might include modification of the system, extending the monitoring term, acquiring additional water rights for the properties, or creating additional mitigation. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dan and Joe for conclusion and next steps. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Don. Yeah, we just a couple more just kind of closing remarks from Joe and I, and we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to take the next half hour to read the staff recommendation. Actually, I won't be doing that. This is also in your packet. It's quite lengthy. It's a recommendation, staff recommendation, both to the OSBT and council. And staff arrived at this recommendation, as I alluded to earlier, through a lot of analysis and assessment of all the materials and all the documentations that have been provided from utility staff, that has been requested by open space staff, and arrived at the recommendation of supporting the transfer request along with the other considerations that have been described by Bethany and Don in terms of acquisitions, mitigation, and restoration. So if we can go to the next slide, there are a couple of more steps for the transfer request. And they involved, as Nuria alluded to when we first started, that tonight is about the staff recommendation, clarifying questions, and public testimony. This public hearing item will then be continued. First at the OSBT will continue the public hearing at its March 13th, 2024 regular business meeting, in which it will deliberate and act on the staff recommendation. And it will provide council, the board is expecting to provide council with its recommendation. I'll note that there will be no further public testimony at this continuation. Upon the receipt of OSBT's recommendation on March 21st, 2024, council will continue the public hearing. It will deliberate and act on the OSBT recommendation. I will note that there'll be limited public testimony provided and taken at that council meeting in relationship to the OSBT action and recommendation. And one final note in regarding the how disposals work is that no open space land shall be disposed of until 60 days following the date of city council approval of the disposal. And that is to allow for a petition period. So even if this is approved by both the board and the council on the 21st of March, there'll be a 60-day period before the execution of the disposal can take place. So next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Joe to bring our presentation to a conclusion.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And I want to wrap things up tonight by talking about the images on this slide. This is the last slide of our presentation. On the left is a photo of the car on Koala Drive. And Koala Drive is just on the north side of US 36 near the Table Mesa Park and Ride. I've referred back to this photo often through the years that we've been working on the project, as it's just a reminder of what we're really talking about and how intense the floodwaters were back in 2013. This is what it looked like when the water spilled over US 36 in the middle of the night and onto those streets to the north. Not far from where this photo was taken was the Fraser Meadows retirement home. And I was in a different role at the time, but I'll never forget going to Water Resources Advisory Board meetings and council meetings and hearing the public testimony and the harrowing tales of what it was like to evacuate residents from that facility in the middle of the night. On the right side of the screen is an image of some pages that we prepared in a council information packet memo a few years ago. This was at City Council's request to document the alternatives that had been studied over the years. And my intent of including these on these slides is not for people to be able to read it line by line, but just to show the volume of it. And there are 3 pages of tables on 11 by 17 sheets of alternatives that have been considered over many years. I counted them up and there are 58 of them. Some of them go back to 1973. So this project and the alternatives really have been studied. And in Brandon's presentation, he showed the schedule slide and how all the things work together. The crux of that schedule slide and how that relates to tonight is that doing this disposal now really allows us to proceed on this project as expeditiously as possible without any additional delays. The last thing I want to mention, as we've gone through a process of elimination of those 58 alternatives and have landed on a single alternative that we're now designing around, I hope our presentation tonight gave people a sense for the way we have designed for flood protection. And as the mitigation tables showed in Dawn's portion of the presentation, we have mitigated for the unavoidable environmental impacts, and in many cases have gone well beyond, above and beyond the regulatory requirements. So Brandon, I think you can take the slides down now, and Mayor Brockett, that's the end of our presentation, and we'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Joe. And thanks to all of you. It was extremely detailed but well presented information. Shows how long the road has been that we've been on for this project. I'm not sure that we got a formal introduction from some of the presenters. Brandon, Bethany, and Don, would you mind each of you in turn just introducing yourself for the record?
Sure. I'm Brandon Coleman. I'm the engineering project manager in the storm flood utility and the project manager for the South Boulder Creek flood mitigation project.
Bethany?
Hi, everyone. I'm Bethany Collins, the real estate senior manager for open space and mountain parks.
And Don?
Hello, Don D'Amico, Senior Resource Project Manager and Wetland Ecologist for Open Space and Mountain Parks.
Great, thanks for dotting our I's and crossing our T's there, guys. And with that, it is now time for council and board questions. So any clarifying questions that people have, now is your time to ask them.
For clarity, Aaron, we can ask other questions to clarify after we have public comment. Is that right? This is we get another chance, correct?
You do. Although if you have any questions in your mind now, please ask them. And just if the public testimony brings up any additional questions, we could ask those at the end.
Okay, appreciate it. Thanks for clarifying.
Thanks. And if you can use your Zoom raise hand function, please, I can keep you in order. I got Tina and then Mark.
Hi, thank you for all the information. I just had a quick question about the timing of permitting versus the disposal of land that's come up a couple times. And it's just to understand at a high level how the engagement with the different groups like the fish and wildlife or whichever groups that need to authorize the flood project, when do they come in exactly? In terms of when we can actually start doing the work, which I think is slated for early 2025. So it seems like all the permitting has to happen in the next 7 months. Am I getting the timeline correct?
I can answer that, and Brandon can fill in details, but yeah, you do have that timing correct. And as Brandon mentioned in his explanation of the project details, we've really been focused on the footprint of the flood project infrastructure to inform this disposal process. And that also allows us to now go forward with the permitting agencies, because the same footprint information and the area needed and the acreage of impacts is really important to those permitting activities.
And then my second question is, will we have any type of community dashboard or timeline so that the community understands which step we're at and who we're engaging with and what the outcomes are? Given that, as Nuria pointed out at the beginning of this meeting, that there is such a high community interest, it might just be helpful even for myself to point people to where, what's happening and who we're talking to and what are the outcomes.
Yeah, for sure. And others can again add to that, but we have a project website. We've been meeting regularly with our communication staff and department team members, and our intention is to do regular updates when we do hit one of those milestones. And for example, Brandon mentioned the 60% design package having just been completed. as we were getting ready for this meeting tonight. And within the last week, that information got updated on the website. So really would point people to that. If there are more significant activities, we can certainly use other means to inform the council and the board and community.
Thank you so much.
Mark, and then Dave, and then John.
Okay, thank you. Just really a couple of questions. I see that the bids are to go out for construction in the first quarter of 25. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you have a sense of how many firms you're going to be expecting to respond to our RFP on this?
You know, I might defer to Brandon on that one. A project of this complexity, we would sometimes pre-qualify contractors and establish a number of them who can bid on the project in advance. I'm not sure if we're planning to do that here, but it's a big important project, so I would expect interest to be high. Brandon, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Sure. I think one of the benefits of working with open space and also focusing on the spillway is we were able to bring in a construction consultant to kind of review how we've structured our bid and also the constructability of our project. So we did get a lot of good feedback on there. And I think that also makes the project very attractive. So the way this project is going to be designed, it's a high hazard dam, and we will need to do a design bid build. So we'll only be able to bid it after the design is complete.
Thank you. And Joe, you know, we've had this conversation previously about the cost estimates for this project. And I guess I'm going to ask the question again, which is, do you have a contingency plan if it turns out it's not a 60 or $65 million project at all, but something much more expensive?
For sure, and that sometimes happens on capital projects, and we have options to deal with that if something comes in much larger than what we were expecting. We have been carrying a fairly heavy contingency in our project cost estimates to date. Of course, as we get more detail, that as is a normal practice on the design project, we'll shrink that contingency. And Mark, I know you have been really interested in the costs and appreciate that. And we just had a flood study session a few weeks ago. We have received updated costs as part of the 60% design package. We haven't posted that information yet on the website because we're going back and forth with the consultant on some of the details of that, but the costs have not substantively changed from the 63 million that we've been sharing with the council and the public for the last few years.
I can't tell you how much I hope you are correct and my skepticism is misplaced. My only other question is, as I recall, the provisions of the annexation agreement, which I think are burned into my head, that is effectively contingent upon our getting our approvals, correct?
Correct.
And I assume this, and I may have just missed it, I assume this disposal is similarly contingent upon our getting our approvals.
That is correct. I might offer Dan and Bethany to weigh in on that, but the way we've structured this, and we've done this on past projects, we're getting in advance, well in advance. We need the open space disposal and landowner approvals to demonstrate to the permitting agencies that we have permission to use the land. We could go forward without that, but it's a much better position to be in. And so Dan, Bethany, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I'll let Bethany, if you want to talk about the relationship of this regarding, and then the acquisition of the water rights and the land.
Yeah, sure. I think Mark is getting at that the transfer would be contingent upon an approved flood project. And yes, if the flood project was not approved, then the transfer would come back, the land would come back to open space.
Okay, thank you. You've answered my every question. I appreciate it. A great
Sure.
presentation. Thank you again.
Dave and then Matt. It looks like Sean, you lowered your hand. Let's go with Dave.
I have two questions. Joe, as we've been talking, the timing on the disposal decision and the relationship to the permitting process, I think is still causing confusion. Can you give us a little more detail on the status of the permits that we need to acquire for the project?
I can for sure do that, and Brandon can probably fill in the details because he's closer to it than I am. So we have had permit process meetings and discussions with all of the permitting agencies, and have gone through with each of them what the project is, what our intention is. It's a common practice and a common step for a large complex project. So the agencies know what we're planning, and that's an important step because we would get information back from them if they were concerned about something we were doing, or if there was a red flag in the permitting process. So we've taken that really important step in consulting with all of the agencies, and then really having the team focus on the impact area and the footprint of the detention dam and flood wall and spillway to get ready for this disposal process has been an important step. And that will now allow us to, in the real near term, be submitting those permit applications. And Brandon, I'd invite you to add anything you'd like to that.
Sure, and I'll just walk through how the disposal, I tried my best on that schedule slide, how it feeds into information that we're using for a lot of these permits. So the disposal area does parallel US 36, so impacts to the CDOT right of way, having clarity on the spillway location and also the disposal helps us acquire the CDOT special use permit, which is the Colorado Department of Transportation, and that's allowing us to do work in their right of way. So a portion of the project will need to be done in CDOT right of way, and that's what the special use permit will get us. The next permit would be the 404 permit, which is a Waters of US permit. It's regulated by the US Army Corps of Engineers, and we have gotten a jurisdictional determination from them about what is waters of the US and what wetlands are jurisdictional at a federal level. And we do have waters of the US that are going to be impacted by the project. So the Corps will be our lead federal agency, and they'll be responsible for consultation with US Fish and Wildlife related to threatened and endangered species. And this spillway location in the transfer area is actually located in Preble's Meadow Jumping Mouse habitat and also Ute Lady Truss orchid habitat. So having these impacts defined through this disposal actually helps us determine what mitigation we need to do and also what impacts we have associated with the project. The other one is the facility is a high hazard dam. So and we'll be submitting our PCN very soon, which is a pre-construction notification to the Corps, which also includes our biological assessment, which they would submit to the Fish and Wildlife Service on our behalf. The Dam Safety Engineer's Office would give a design approval at the end of final design, but we have multiple meetings with them throughout the process. So we've had a meeting with them at 30% design. We'll have another meeting with them at 60% design, and we'll also do a risk analysis with them, which is a multi-day workshop with a bunch of professionals from the dam safety world to evaluate the safety of the facility. And then lastly, FEMA, we have completed our FEMA Clomer application, and we'll submit that to the city first, and then they would review that. And if they give us approval, that would then go to FEMA, and then Mile High Flood District would also be a reviewer with FEMA for that permit. So all of those things can be defined very well with this disposal. So it actually helps us be able to submit those permits and actually have those conversations and have a really meaningful review from those agencies. Because if we were to get those permits and something were to change, that could then restart the process, which is actually a risk to the schedule that I presented before. So hopefully that's comprehensive enough, but happy to answer any more questions.
Great. Thank you. And I have one other question for Don. Don, we talk a lot about the monitoring plan and environmental assessment plan. So what are some general measures of success that we are going to employ in the monitoring plan for the mitigation? How will we determine that the mitigation is successful?
Well, there are a number of ways that can happen. Typically, the regulatory agency specifies the criteria and the success parameters associated with the mitigation. When the applicant submits a mitigation plan, sometimes the application includes measures of success. They are reviewed by the regulatory agencies. Sometimes they're modified depending on specific resources in the project area. But I guess your question about specifically what parameters are measured, it's vegetation nativity, which is the native to non-native component. Certainly for wetland mitigation, it's whether the mitigation meets the 3 parameters that are typically used to define wetlands: soils, hydrology, and vegetation. So there in the delineation manual, there are specific things that parameters that need to be met: percent cover, say for instance, of obligate or facultative wet plant species, for instance, or water within a certain distance of the ground surface for significant enough amount of time during the growing season to create wetland hydric soils, wetland soils, and support wetland vegetation. So a lot of different things go into the success criteria, and they're oftentimes dependent on the resources impact. And on this project, you've heard there are a lot of important resources, federally protected, city regulated. There's just a lot of things going on out there that I think will necessitate a lot of pretty stringent monitoring success criteria that'll be included in the permits.
So where the federally listed species, the threatened Euclides tressus orchid and the Preble's meadow jumping mouse are concerned, how are we going to determine the suitable habitat for them? Is it presence, absence, or what's going to be in the monitoring plan for that, as far as you know?
Well, yet to be determined, but I would imagine for Euclides tressus orchid, in past projects we've looked at the actual colonization or establishment of that individual plant, individuals of that plant on site. That takes a long time. It's not like you spread a little seed out there and they pop up the next growing season. It's a challenge, and it has been a challenge in projects that were designed to mitigate for the impacts and to create a habitat that would support the orchid in the past. For Preble's meadow jumping mouse, there are habitat characteristics of Preble's habitat that have been used in the past to define and identify whether habitat for that species has been created. A lot of that focuses on the establishment of native shrubs, which they use to hibernate underneath during the hibernation season. So, for example, the percent cover or the density of, say, 2 or 3 native shrub species that were planted as mitigation could be monitored and measured, and their growth documented, their survivorship and their growth documented. Another options include actually trapping in the future, live trapping, obviously, for Preble's to determine whether they have become established in the habitat that was created or restored.
Great, thanks.
Matt? Thanks, Aaron. My question is for Joe. And I know you sort of brought this up in our last meeting, talking about some various flood projects, but here we are talking about the South Boulder Creek. And I wanted to see if you could remind us of the newly formed prioritization matrix that community spent a lot of time developing in partnership, obviously, with the city a couple of years back. And I just wanted to kind of get if you could sort of remind everybody, where would the South Boulder Creek flood mitigation project stack up in that new established prioritization matrix?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. And thanks for the question, Matt. And what you're referring to, we had a 2022 comprehensive stormwater and flood plan that City Council and the Water Resources Advisory Board weighed in on and took action on. And that plan included a new way of prioritizing flood projects. And it included a whole bunch of additional factors over and above the benefit cost ratio that had been in the past. And the community really informed what the prioritization of those factors were. Life safety was one of them and was at the top of the list. Equity was another one. And so we ranked over 30 projects, 39 if I remember correctly. And the South Boulder Creek flood mitigation project was the #1 project on that list of projects. So it came out on top.
Wonderful. Thanks for that reminder, Joe. Appreciate it.
Right. Any other questions? Seeing none, we will now move to the public hearing. And so council and board members, we're going to hear from each testifier for 2 minutes each, unless they're pulling time, which they will get 5 minutes. And if you have a question for a specific testifier, you can raise your hand and ask them at that time. Otherwise, any clarifying questions that are raised by testimony should be asked at the end of the public hearing. So with that, Elisha, if you could read our public participation guidelines, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Elisha Johnson, serving the city as your city clerk and records manager. Thank you for being here tonight, those that are virtually and watching on other medium. We will now review the public participation guidelines at our city council meetings. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision of productive, meaningful, and inclusive civil conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and council, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement processes, please visit our website at bouldercolorado.gov/services/productive atmospheres. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in this Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during the meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct a meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they commonly are known by, and individuals must display their whole names before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Again, thank you for being here. And Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Elisha. All right. Our first 3 speakers are Dan Johnson, Sam Weaver, and Leslie Durgan. Dan, you can get us started, please. Dan, it looks like you're muted. If you can unmute, you can start your testimony.
I am. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, just thank you to the City Council and the OSMB Board for allowing me a chance to speak tonight. My name is Dan Johnson. I'm a water resources engineer practicing in this area. I was on the RAB during the 2013 flood and continued on the RAB through the initial approval by City Council of this concept in 2015. Since then, I've been quite interested in seeing how the project progresses, of course. What I've noted and been mentioned tonight, and we all know this has been a very long process. It's taken considerable time to get where we are today. Many concepts have been studied, as Joe indicated. And out of those, they've been so well vetted that I think it's going to be very challenging to find something that's better. There were many technical issues that came up, were resolved and put away. I think Joe's staff and prior to Joe, working on those issues as well as their consultants. There are a couple of technical issues that I think have misconceptions. One is the groundwater bypass, which was discussed, and those systems seem to be solved quite well. But another one is the 100-year versus the 500-year capacity for this system. And that there's some misconception in that, and the most recently was stressed in the Tuesday's camera. And that is that the dam would fail. That's not going to happen because, as mentioned, this will be designed for the full flood. So that misconception is not a problem. Anyway, that 100-year flood, actually what will happen with that is that even for floods in excess of 100 years, the dam will stay in place, the spillway operate, and actually any flood in excess of a 100-year flood will be reduced from what it would be without that storage basin in place. So all the floods up to 100 and beyond 100 would be well fixed. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Dan. Next, we have Sam Weaver, who is pooling with Andy Schwartz and Ryan Bradley. Can we just get a confirmation that Andy and Ryan are here, please?
Hi, this is Andy Schwartz.
And they are all here.
Okay, great. So, Sam, you have 5 minutes.
And Mayor, Sam has 2 videos that he has requested to be played. And so as soon as he cues me to pull those up, we will begin those videos.
Very good. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mayor Brockett and council members for your time, as well as Chair Carroll and OSB trustees. My name is Sam Weaver, and in September of 2013, I was serving on the planning board when the flood occurred. And in November of that year, I joined council where I served through 2021. So I have a lot of personal background with both the flood and the work that we've done at CU South since, and I got a visceral connection to this. And so I'd like to start with a couple of videos to remind us of the context of what was happening in our community when this occurred. And I will say that the car which you saw in the photos that was trapped in the flood is owned by one of the people I'm pooling time with. So there's a lot of actual touches here. And so, Alicia, if you could show those 2 videos, please.
You can sort of see where the dividers start to show up. It's running through the neighborhood Pima and Kuala at about 5 feet deep. And this is the whitewater that's right on Apache and Thunderbird. We can't even get any closer than this or get into the neighborhood.
Overnight, flash flooding in Boulder, Colorado.
The sirens have just sounded again in Boulder.
As growing floods have cut off almost every road to the city of nearly 100,000 people.
This is at 36 and Apache and Mohawk.
2013, we had a major flood event. It happened in various parts of the city, but the worst was the South Boulder Creek. And we had people who literally were in danger of losing their lives.
During the 2013 floods, the water in our neighborhood rose so rapidly that my husband and I were forced to evacuate our house, wading out in thigh-deep water. It was the most terrifying night of my life.
The night of the flood, we had people, 56, I believe, that night. Half of them with Alzheimer's.
Someone came running down the hall saying, "Get to higher ground, get to higher ground."
The last people I remember being pushed out, the water in that courtyard we were pushing with wheelchairs was thigh deep.
We're very fortunate that nobody died during the evacuation. Boulder County was considered a disaster area.
This was the first non-Jewish converts to Christianity. A valued and loyal companion of the Apostle Paul, he traveled extensively with him throughout the Middle East and Europe.
Thank you, Alicia. Can you all hear me? Just give me a thumbs up. Somebody, if I'm back on. Okay, very good. So just a couple more minutes and a couple more points. I would say that the decision which is before council and OSBT in the question that you got to vote on when you reconvene is pretty simple. Will the mitigation that is planned by staff address the environmental concerns that occur if these 4 acres are transferred and 2 of them are used to build the flood project? And I think the answer is a resounding yes, that the environmental concerns are quite able to be mitigated on the 120 new acres of land and the 30 shares of water rights, which we will get as part of the overall context of the annexation agreement with the landowner, the university, and our OSMP department. The 120 acres, which will be newly rewatered when the levee is taken down, is land which was, essentially ruined as a gravel mining pit, as habitat, and will be restored and rewatered as part of the overall agreement that we've made. The only question I've heard that is substantial about making this disposal is it reversible if the flood project doesn't happen? And the answer is yes. This is a conditional approval for land transfer from one city department to another. And if the flood project doesn't happen, it's reversible. So if for some reason something unforeseen prevents the flood project from occurring, this land will transfer back. So with that, I think I'll just stop and let you move on to the rest of the public testimony. But I will say that I've heard hundreds of hours of testimony from people who very, very dearly would like to see this project come in place and protect the lives of the people downstream, and in particular, protect US 36 and Foothills from being closed. Both of those roadways in and out of Boulder were closed for more than 24 hours during the flood of 2013, and that meant that the city was isolated. And so I will stop there and say, please vote yes on this. It would be great if there were unanimous decision on both Open Space Board and Council to proceed with this flood safety project. And thank you very much to staff for all the work you've done bringing this forward.
Thanks for that, Sam. And I'll just note, I gave Sam a little extra time because we had some pauses while we were waiting for the videos to get started. So Matt, did you have a question for Sam?
I did. Sam, thank you so much for your work and your service during this incredibly difficult time, and certainly countless others that our community has experienced. I did want to ask a question as one of our city council members sort of leading the negotiations for the annexation agreement, and how much time you spent with this. What are the pieces of this agreement that you are most proud of through the lens of how they benefit our city? And so I just wanted to kind of get your, having worked through that, what are the pieces you're most proud of that benefit our community?
Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate the question. I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that we brought 120 acres into our open space system. And I think one of the things that goes along with that is the water rights as well. So without being able to get the shares of the water that flow through that property, we wouldn't be able to rewater it. And that was a key part of the negotiations with the university. It was the one, as they say in the West, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. And that sure was the case in the negotiations, because that was the hardest thing for the university to part with. And it was the thing that we most needed so that we could do good environmental mitigation. So one of the pieces I'm most proud of is that we get both the 120 acres and the water rights to be able to do something good with that. I think the other thing is that the deal's reversible. The annexation, the development, this disposal, all of those provisions can reverse if for some reason we can't build the flood project. So I believe the community was making an agreement here that says we will give up some of the land that we like to walk our dogs on and enjoy in exchange for getting 120 acres of really good pristine habitat land that we can enjoy and the flood wall. And if the community can't get the flood wall and the flood safety is part of it, it can all be reversed. So I guess, Matt, the other element that I think is important about this, including this disposal, is that if the whole agreement doesn't come to fruition, then we can all back out of our parts of it. So I think that's it, Matt.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much, Sam.
Very good. Okay, our next three speakers are Leslie Durkin, Elmar Dornberger, and Margaret Lecomte.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I acknowledge the importance of the Preble's jumping mouse and the Ute Ladies tresses, but I have a different point of view that I would like to stress tonight, and that is the impact on people in our community, which Joe mentioned in his remarks, but we've really focused on other issues tonight. I really want to encourage all of you to approve the disposal when it becomes before you in March. And the impact on the flood protection and safety for our community is utmost in my mind. 2,300 households will be impacted by the flooding if it is not corrected in that area of Boulder. 400 elderly residents at Fraser Meadows, including, as you heard, about half of them in dementia and memory care, are at risk. And all of the Boulder citizens will need access on 36 Table Mesa and Foothills Drive in an emergency. The annexation and its contents have been reviewed and adopted by council. They have also been solidly approved by the citizens in 2021 and 2022 in 2 general elections that I was honored to chair. The disposal is reasonable, it's practical, it's ethical, and it's beneficial to the community. We in the Fraser area are very excited about the gold standard of 100-year flood protection that this disposal would allow, and urge your support next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. Now we have Elmar Dornberger, Margaret Lecomte, and James Morris.
Good evening. My name is Elmar Dornberger. I live on 4890 Koala Drive. It's exactly diagonally across from that red car that you just saw several times. 2 minutes are not enough time to tell you the horror that I went through going through a flood. So this is kind of hard for me to tell you in 2 minutes why we need flood mitigation. So I'm going to try to focus just on one thing, one aspect. So this happened 10 years ago. And the last meeting, public meeting I was at about flood mitigation, I asked the question again, what is the rescue plan for our neighborhood? And nobody had an answer. So I asked again, what is the rescue plan? What are we supposed to do if this happens again? And then finally somebody said to me, you need to have a ladder and an axe. A ladder and an axe. That's the rescue plan. So I asked, what is that for? Well, the ladder is you climb on top of your house. And in case you need to get back into your house, then you use your axe. Really? That is the solution for people who are in the floodplain? So please, approve this, make this happen. People like us in this neighborhood, we need more than just an axe and a ladder. We need protection. Thank you.
Thank you, Elmar. Now we have Margaret Lecomte, James Morris, and Peter Dawson.
Margaret, your mic is muted if you'd like to unmute.
Here are some facts about the 2013 flooding. The flash flood that inundated Fraser Meadows in 23 is personal for me, like the previous speaker. I live 2 blocks from that red car that you've seen pictures of, and my mother lives in the Fraser Meadows retirement community on the first floor in her apartment, her house, her one room filled up with water. But that flood came from a bank collapse near Dowdy Draw, not from South Boulder Creek. And South Boulder Creek wasn't the full cause of the 2013 flooding. Despite that, the Open Space Board is being asked to give away highly protected wetland habitat to build a $100 million project for South Boulder Creek that will not protect against another 2013 style flood, will be inadequate against future floods, will fail to control the streams that did in fact cause the 2013 flood, and therefore worsen future downstream flooding, all at the same time risking destruction of highly protected wetlands in the state natural area open space and the threatened species that rely upon them, which is why the Open Space Board of Trustees should reject this disposal. The South Boulder Creek project design is still incomplete, has obtained none of the permits required for its construction, even from CDOT. Its mitigation and restoration strategies are still unproven. The problem is that the plan's design has been dictated by CU's real estate interests and desire for an unneeded third campus. Therefore, it has never fully prioritized human lives, property, and public safety, or the environment in South Boulder. Utilities says its plan is the best they can do to protect Boulder citizens. But this is demonstrably false. It's just fear tactics to disguise the real agendas, costs, risks, and consequences of the project to humans and environment. The open
Margaret, your
space
time is up, but thank you for your testimony. Next, we have James Morris, Peter Dawson, and Lynn Siegel.
Hello, I'm Jim Morris. Wetlands and prairies store greenhouse gases and catch and store floodwaters. There's a quote from a Brazilian native, "It's only with protected territory that we'll be able to stop climate change from happening and preserve our biome." These areas were supposed to be protected as open space, but CU's used a loophole saying that the state didn't have to follow city and county comprehensive plan regulations. Let's call this what it is. It's a land grab. It's taking the aquifer, the floodplain, South Boulder Creek, the prairie, the wildlife, and the places for people to recreate. It's taking all of this and turning it into development in a dam. And we're losing the absorption that you have when you have wetlands and ponds. You can sort of stop floods and they gradually release things. Transplanting doesn't work in general for wetlands. You just build something, you can't make the same plants, animals, and fungi happen in the same place. Knowledgeable people say we should have flood warning systems and floodplain critical infrastructure improvements done. And we should also have done a 500-year flood dam, a land exchange, or a dam upstream. But CU wanted the maximum amount of land to build on. Another Brazilian native said, "If you continue this way, the wind will increase, the sun will grow very hot, the earth too. All of us will be unable to breathe. We will all be silenced." This seems just crazy. I mean, CU back in 97 filled 40 ponds, bulldozed the land, ditched and drained wetlands. There were 40 ponds there, straight into streams, scraped the land bare. I mean, this is a selfish real estate interest, not caring about people or wildlife for our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Now we have Peter Dawson, Lynn Siegel, and Michael Browning.
Sorry. I hope you can hear me. I'm Pete Dawson, a
resident of Fraser Meadows Retirement Community since 2015. In order to get some of the details straight, I consulted a transcribed interview of our chaplain, Bob Ritson, that was done in 2014. That'll support some of the details I speak of. I have, oh yeah, there's my paper, my PDF to show at the end. The history shows three things about the flood. It was dangerous, it disrupted people's lives, and it caused a lot of damage. At Fraser, people with dementia and medical problems lived in a separate building. There were 108 of them. These people had to be evacuated across the courtyard to the main building. The police and the fire departments couldn't come because of the flood. The electricity went out. In the dark, some residents could walk and others were taken in wheelchairs. The water was knee deep and you couldn't see through it. Staff did frequent head counts and no one disappeared. The underground parking garages filled to the top with water. You could hear the cars bumping up against the roof as they started to float. We lost 83 cars. Fraser had to replace the assisted living building and skilled nursing at a cost of millions of dollars. Those were completed several years ago. Bob Ritson said in his transcribed interview, a good thing came out of this. We're really going to make sure that the damage doesn't happen again, not just to Fraser Meadows, but to the town of Boulder. How can we best make sure that this doesn't happen again? The residents of Fraser Meadows have an answer. 300 of us signed a newspaper ad in 2021 asking.
Pete, I'm afraid your time is up, but thank you for your testimony. Now we have Lynn Siegel, Michael Browning, and Francis Hartog.
My brother bought a place on Berkeley in '85. He was watching the floodplain from South Boulder Creek and Veely, but he missed Bear Creek. As a result, he backed out of the deal and lost thousands of dollars in closing costs. So, you know, if people live in a floodplain, they're asking for it. Gilbert White is the guy who started the Natural Hazard Center, and this is just a land grab on the part of CU. It's all about the money. It started out in '81. There were 3 lakes. There was 41.5 acres of water coverage. And then after it changed hands with Western, in '97, it became 4 acres, 41.5 to 4 acres. This is like a mole. This thing that sticks out, if you look aerodynamically at the space, it sticks out. We need to reestablish the natural alluvium as much as possible. Otherwise, it goes tops over. It's not a 500-year plan. Tops over, and it's going to do a lot more damage to people downstream. And so it's a matter of who it does damage to. And I saw this happening in the 2013 flood when people set up sandbags and redirected water. Dams are bad in a flood. And this is basically a dam. And it overtops, and then it causes much worse damage and much worse loss of life. So it's almost like Israel-Palestine. People on both sides want peace, right? They all want to be safe, but it's a matter of how you get safe. And I say we don't do it by.
Lynn, your time is up, but thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Michael Browning, then Francis Hartog and Karen Holweg.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I live at 3186 Galena Way in Boulder. I'm an attorney who specialized in real estate, land use, and water rights for 40 years. Over a series of meetings in 2020 and 2021, the Open Space Board of Trustees carefully and thoroughly considered what conditions needed to be satisfied before the land desired by the city for the flood project is taken out of open space program. These conditions are largely consistent with the broad brush of the required mitigation plan by staff tonight, but provide critical details that are necessary to make that plan successful. I really have three major points to make. One, the real issue tonight is not whether OSMP should dispose of land for the project, but when that transfer should occur. There's no legitimate reason for the transfer of the lands to be made now. Such a transfer is not, I repeat, not required for the city to apply for the permits, as the staff has conceded. So there's no need to transfer. The planning for the project can proceed just fine without transferring the lands right now to utilities. My second point is that the staff concedes that many additional agreements between utilities and OSMP still need to be prepared. These agreements will set forth critical terms about the monitoring plan, the criteria, success, etc. After the lands are transferred to utilities, mountain parks will have no leverage to ensure that those agreements are consistent with the required mitigation measures, and the required mitigation measures will be funded and completed. The staff says, don't worry, we'll prepare those agreements later, but there's no reason those agreements cannot be prepared now and may be available for the trustees and the public to review before management of lands is transferred. In summary, the city wants OSMP to go first. In fact, OSMP should go last. After all, it's OSMP land is being sacrificed. The current process puts the cart before the horse. So the current motion should be tabled until all the necessary details and permits have been hammered out.
Your time is up, but thank you for your testimony. And next we have Francis Hartog, Karen Holweg, and Ben Binder.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm reaching out to you tonight as a former open space trustee and a 40-year resident of the city of Boulder. Open space trustees are entrusted to protect our precious open space lands. A utility staff member has said that this disposal is no different than disposing of ag lands to build a pipeline. That board is a bit insulting to be told that disposing of dedicated open space land for dam construction, indeed land that's habitat for threatened species, is just like disposing of ag land for pipeline construction. It's not. And that statement is indicative that utilities shouldn't manage these open space lands pending permit issuance. Open space trustees passed a 2021 resolution stating what needs to be done as a condition of disposing of the lands. That resolution was drafted and adopted based on significant research and consideration. Apparently, little's been done to comply with that resolution. At the very least, as trustees, I implore you to insist that flood dam permits be received before you transfer the property. A reversion to occur if utilities fail to obtain permits or has no other use for the property is a violation of the public trust. In concluding, I'd ask the trustees and our council members to please make public all communications with the state and the federal government on this matter, so your constituents can evaluate any requirements and not have to rely on what we're told. After all, it's over 2 years since the deal with CU was approved, and the staff should have received some definitive communications by now. Thank you for your service. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this important matter.
Thank you, Francis. Now we have Karen Holweg, Ben Binder, and Ken Vitale.
Hi, Karen Holweg. I served on the Open Space Board of Trustees from 2018 to 2023. In 2021, the Open Space Board of Trustees was asked to approve a conditional disposal of open space property south of Highway 36 for the South Boulder Creek Flood Mitigation Project. We looked in detail at the work done 8 years earlier concerning the construction of a bikeway on the south side of 36 as a clear precedent for what's needed to start the construction of the flood wall. Here on this first slide is what was done and presented to OSMP in March 2013 to prepare for the bikeway construction and mitigation. All of the steps that you can see were completed in writing by CDOT, RTD, Federal Highway Administration, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and OSMP, so that the monies could be available. The environmental impact statement was prepared. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had created a formal biological opinion. And on the next slide, the compensatory mitigation property was acquired, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had designed the success criteria that were asked about earlier. All of this was done 4 months before CDOT came back to OSBT with a formal request for disposal of the land for the bikeway. This process served as a precedent for creating the June 2021 resolution that you have in your packet tonight and that has been mentioned by others. The need for an OSBT disposal motion is not stopping progress for this flood wall. The lack of progress in consulting with relevant agencies and gaining the written documents described in the 2021 resolution is what is holding up the construction of the flood wall. And until that work is done, an OSBT disposal of the Van Vliet acreage is not yet needed. Thank you for allowing me to show you the procedures open space used to dispose the land according to the city charter, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Karen. Next, we have Ben Binder, Ken Bytel, and Richard Harris.
My name is Ben Binder, and I live in South Boulder. As you know, a dam permit must be obtained from the state of Colorado. The city would be wise to delay open space disposal until an application was made for the permit. State engineers have had an opportunity to review the plans, and a permit was granted. The city has not yet submitted a permit application to the Office of Dam Safety. During the permit evaluation process, open space needed for the flood wall might be significantly altered, so it is premature to develop legal documents to transfer the property. Given the history of past inexcusable engineering errors on the property, it would be wise to wait until the engineers have had an opportunity to review the city's plans before disposing of open space. Some of the past errors that have taken place on this property: the Veely Channel fiasco. In 2017, the city council approved a flood control plan with major flaws. For example, Veely Channel ran right into the side of the dam with no place for the water to go except back up into the neighborhoods. The blunder was corrected by moving the project onto land designated for CU development. As a result, in addition to paying hundreds of thousands to revise the plans, we will pay $4 million to import 150,000 cubic yards of earthfill to raise a portion of CU's gravel pit above the floodplain. CU right-of-way. At a city council meeting in 2017, Boulder's project manager falsely stated that CDOT had agreed to allow Boulder to use its right-of-way for the flood wall. In fact, CDOT never granted Boulder the use of its land. Engineering plans had to be modified at significant cost, and the city is now in the process of disposing of open space. This problem could have been easily avoided if the city council did its job and asked hard questions instead of rubber stamping staff recommendations. Given the likelihood of plan revisions, Boulder would be wise to delay disposal of open space until state engineers have had an opportunity to review and comment on the city's plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Next, we have Ken Bytel, Richard Harris, and Steve Pomerantz.
Yeah, before we begin, Alicia, can you show a slide every 10 seconds and then stop at the majestic elk grazing in the area to be disposed, please? Thanks. Honorable Open Space Board of Trustees, thanks for your dedication and service. I've had the pleasure of discussing this with you since 2018. I'm chair of the Wilderness Conservation for the Meadowlark Open Space. Just to note, this is the last chance for the public to provide input before your vote on March 13th. And that vote on the 13th is not a recommendation. It is a legally binding decision that both council and staff must follow. I'd like to quote one of my favorite people on February 2020, Mayor Sam Weaver. For what it's worth, the 500-year plan is the most cost-effective per person protected, Mayor Sam Weaver noted. Now, public safety is being used to justify the disposal of Boulder open space that contains federally endangered species. Since OSBT is being tasked with protecting public safety, I ask you to do one step better. Let us make sure any proposed plan will provide 500-year flood protection. There's missing alternatives in this case. Boulder City Council refused to conduct an environmental impact assessment. The community suspects there's Preble habitats on the CU South proposed property. Also, there is the missing alternative of what would flood mitigation look like if there was a CU land swap and the entire area remained open space. We believe that would be the most cost-effective alternative. And from public safety, it would also provide 500-year flood protection. And you can make this happen by voting to protect Boulder open space on March 13th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Next, we have Richard Harris, Steve Pomerantz, and Bev Baker.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm Dick Harris, 2645 Briarwood. Plan Boulder County opposes the disposal of open space land to the Utilities Department prior to the receipt of all the required permits for construction of the South Boulder Creek flood mitigation. As always, the disposal of this open space should be contingent upon obtaining all necessary permits and funding. The land to be disposed of is being treated as though it's insignificant, that it's just a small piece and will be more than replaced by the addition of 119 acres of a mined out gravel pit that will somehow be restored to a functional and valuable part of the open space system. While improving that ruined land will certainly add value, it is not of equivalent natural value to the critical land that's being lost. The land to be disposed of has the highest concentration of ladies' tresses orchids, as well as Preble's jumping mouse habitats. So far, all efforts to transplant the orchids have failed. Because of the high value of what will be destroyed by this part of the flood mitigation project, we strongly urge you to hold off on the open space disposal until the Utilities Department can present permits issued by the Army Corps of Engineers, FEMA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, CDOT, the State Engineer's Office, Dam Safety Branch, and the city office responsible for the city's wetlands ordinance. We also strongly request that the negotiations with all these agencies be announced to the public and be open to public public observation, so that there will be no questions about sweetheart deals with these agencies. And we as a public-minded organization can witness those discussions. And thank you.
Thank you, Dick. Next, we have Steve Pomerantz, Bev Baker, and Harold Halstein.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right, thank you. Steve Pomerantz, 335 17th Street. Given all the comments, I'll just make a few points here. Joe Tadeushi says we could go forward without the disposal. And a staff person says the disposal could be contingent. So why are we talking about disposing of it? With regard to all the permitting, there's been a total lack of transparency. Not one single document from the feds or the state have been made available to the citizens. You should reverse that. There's a total lack of clarity with what could go wrong with all this, both in the permitting and in the flood control itself. For example, as somebody brought up, Feedley Lake area will flood the same area if you get a big storm over that. those people will be screwed just like they were in 2013, and all that money and all that effort would have been a waste. What's the city's liability with a high hazard dam? No exploration of that, it's certainly not in public. Lack of serious analysis of the alternatives, like a land swap and using the old gravity pit for holding the ponds. That never really got looked at carefully. And with regard to some of the presentation, point out that that photograph of the car, that could have been on Bluebell Avenue right behind my house. There's a lot of water came down a lot of other places. About Fraser Meadows, since 2013, Fraser Meadows Retirement Community has flood-proofed almost all of its buildings. With regard to Sam Weaver's comments about CU giving up the water, yeah, except that it got city water instead, which was a hell of a lot more valuable than what it gave up. So that's so much for that point. And CU intelligently demands 500-year protection, and the city's going to have to pay for all the gravel fill for that, while the citizens only get 100-year protection. This is a bad deal. I wouldn't sign anything.
Thank you, Steve. Now we have Bev Baker, Harold Hallstein, and Kurt Brown.
Hi, this is Bev Baker. I'm speaking on behalf of Boulder County Audubon this evening. The decision to dispose of 2.2 acres of South Boulder Creek open space and allow use of 1.9 acres during construction is about loss. Real losses of biodiversity, globally imperiled plant communities and the insects depending on them, and the loss of individuals of federally threatened species. The city open space land is so unique with high quality functioning ecosystems that it's part of a designated state natural area, as you're aware. Among its most significant values are exceptional tallgrass prairie, the highest quality remaining tallgrass prairie in the state and region, wetlands that are among the best preserved and most ecologically significant in the Boulder Valley, a breeding population of the federally threatened Preble's meadow jumping mouse, and an important occurrence of the federally threatened Euclides trussus orchid that's one of the largest populations in the entire range for the species, with the highest density of orchids right in this 4.1 acre parcel of land. These losses may not all be mitigated by the work that OSMP and the Utilities Department are proposing, because as had been mentioned previously, no one has yet proven that it's possible to transplant and recreate populations of Euclides trussus orchids or the functioning wet meadow ecosystems in this area. As listed in your packet, permits required by federal law include the Army Corps of Engineers for wetlands impact and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for federally threatened species. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will issue a permit to proceed if they accept the losses of orchids and mice and adverse changes to designated critical habitat for the mouse. We believe that it's important to have these and other required permits in place before asking the OSP and City Council to vote on build a flood wall. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Bev. Now we have Harold Hallstein, Kurt Brown, and Harlan Savage.
I did not see Harold online. Harold, if you are here, please let me know by using the raise hand function or reaching out to me in the Q&A box.
I believe it may be the individual labeled Hal.
Yep, I will let them in now.
Good evening, OSBT and Council. I was the OSBT board chair during a good portion of the annexation agreement negotiations. I'm going to take this opportunity to discuss the political side after my diligent focus on the environmental technical side for many years. I was unceremoniously non-reappointed to the OSBT board for fear I might vote against this project to protect endangered species, the real actual life safety concern. One technical comment, Sam and Rachel are wrong about permits. All the land is in the name of the city of Boulder, deeded, and permits can be applied for before disposal. There are a couple of facts about the trade down from 500 years to 100 years, the lack of ROI on this project, which everyone should understand, the only positive cash flows are represented by the cost savings of flood insurance by the 1,000 or so homeowners who will be lifted out of the 100-year floodplain, which essentially will make this a 60-year payoff I will apologize publicly if you're able to complete this project for less than $80 million after the recent bout of inflation. There is no ability for the city to make similar investments in the dozen other drainages across the city. So how are you going to deal with the equity problems that are created by putting that kind of boondoggle investment in this one location without considering all the other drainages that are at risk? I think it's pretty clear to any person observing this process that trade down, the lack of ROI, the lack of actual human safety concern, the serious endangered species real life safety loss, that this decision is 100% political and is about opening up development. Council no longer needs to take my thoughts seriously. I'm moving out of Boulder because the place is becoming boring and undifferentiated in the pursuit of pro-development policy everywhere. As you cast aside the environmentalist agenda for the pro-development agenda, I do encourage OSBT members on this call as environmentalists to study closely. You have the decision-making power here, not the current majority politicians. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hal. And our next speakers are Kurt Brown, Harlan Savage, and Kirk Vincent.
Kurt, your mic is open.
Good evening, Council and Open Space Board. I'm Kirk Brown. I'm a former OSBT member. I, like others, noticed the statement in the paper that the city cannot even begin the regulatory process until a disposal is first granted. That's certainly at odds with my 35 years of experience in federal water resources planning, including working with both the Corps of Engineers and the Fish and Wildlife Service on Clean Water Act and Endangered Species Act consultations. The fact is that Boulder already owns this property. Internal issues with the city, like do we have enough money to pay for the project? These issues are not of concern to the regulatory agencies. They will grant or not grant regulatory permits based entirely and only upon the full and complete description of the proposed project, plus the environmental assessments needed to support a 404 permit and the Fish and Wildlife Service's biological opinion. I see no reason that the city shouldn't immediately enter into formal permit consultations with the agencies. And the reality is that no implementation of the project on the ground can begin without those permits. Having a disposal today does not in any material way advance the project. That can only be done through consultation. I would therefore recommend that the Open Space Board and Council consider adopting a conditional disposal such that the disposal would become effective automatically upon the city's receipt of all regulatory permits. This approach would honor the first requirement laid out in the board's June 9, 2021 resolution, while at the same time providing certainty about the disposal. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kurt. Our last three speakers are Harlan Savage, Kirk Vincent, and Laura Tyler.
I do not see a Harlan online, but if you are here, please let me know by using the raise hand function or reaching out to me in the Q&A box.
Okay. While we're waiting to see if Harlan will appear, let's hear from Kirk Vincent and Laura Tyler.
Oh, thank you. I'm Kirk Vincent and live in West Boulder and am a research hydrologist, geomorphologist who in 2016 was appointed to the Water Resources Advisory Board and served into 2021. I studied the more than dozen officially named mitigation options and their variants from 2015 onward, and those are obviously aimed at protecting the West Valley. These were both on and off CU South, and both 100 and 500 year levels of protection were considered. The only viable option turned out to be the current approach, located mostly on the abandoned gravel pit at CU South. After council approved the annexation, they also requested that a so-called upstream option committee be convened. The committee was composed of utility staff, the Board of Trustees chair, and the RAB chair, which was myself, and one other member from both boards who were not thrilled with the current plan. We met a half a dozen times and concluded that there was no viable upstream option that would lessen the landscape disturbance. I also observed that wetlands that are away from the creek are apparently man-made. For example, in the northeast corner of the study area on open space are a pair of parallel strips of wetland located on both sides of the US 36 fill section. I believe that the weight of the fill caused upwelling of groundwater, creating the wetlands. Therefore, in my opinion, the mitigation infrastructure, meaning the secant wall, will not touch pristine wilderness. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk. We'll end with Laura Tyler.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Tyler. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. I absolutely support disposal for flood mitigation. If I'd known how many times this car picture was going to show up in this presentation, I wouldn't have picked it, except that this is my front yard, and this car belonged to me and my husband Andy. So anyway, we were part of the 2013 flood. I've been advocating for flood mitigation since I learned that the city was responsible for caring about the citizenry in this area. I remember really clearly, like it was yesterday, the first time I went to OSBT, it was, you guys were in a tiny building off of Cherryvale. And at the time I was so naive, I didn't know the difference between OSBT and OSMP. And I've learned a lot since then. I've learned that part of the reason why this has taken so long is not just all the processes that we've had to go through. It's the fact that this project touches the white hot center of Boulder politics, and that's land use. And so the question before you today is, can you dispose of OSBT land for a public safety project? And yes, there is precedent for this. On October 27th, 2010, there was an OSBT meeting where the discussion of the possible disposal of 2.5 acres of land in El Dorado Springs for a fire station was discussed, and it was ultimately approved. And I encourage you to do the same today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Have we seen Harlan Savage at all in the meeting?
Harlan has not shown up.
Okay. In that case, that's all of our public testimony. Thanks everyone who came out to speak with us tonight, and I will go ahead and close the public hearing and come back to council and the board. As we talked before, we are not deliberating it all tonight, but does anyone have any follow-up questions based on the testimony that we just heard from the public? Nicole, and then Tara.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone who came out to speak with us tonight. I have a question. Probably this one is for Joe and his team. So this project is getting some funding from the Mile High Flood District. And from what I'm understanding about the Mile High Flood District, every time they're giving out funds to local governments for flood mitigation work, it has to go through a pretty thorough review process. And if I'm correct about that, Joe, I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to what that review process entails, and then the credentials and the expertise of the people who are involved in that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question, Nicole. And the Mile High Flood District, just for reference, is a regional entity that coordinates and funds flood projects and maintenance work across jurisdictional boundaries in the Denver metro area and a number of surrounding counties. And Brandon can probably talk more about the details, so I might ask for his assistance in how they partner with us, but they do have technical staff and people who are assigned to each watershed or drainage. They are professional engineers who are experienced in flood project design, and they really become embedded in our work and follow along with our projects, whether it's a major flood project like South Boulder Creek or maintenance activities, which they actually lead on our behalf. And so they will sometimes attend agency meetings with us and follow closely what our plans are for design of something like South Boulder Creek. And I know they've been really supportive of this project. A couple of different individuals for the flood district, as they've transitioned, have followed this. So we've gotten that independent verification. And I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, but I know they have an annual symposium for the whole area. And they really highlighted the South Boulder Creek project and the importance of it to the region as one of, may have been the most important project that they noted, but it was definitely among the more important ones. And Brandon, maybe you can speak to their review activities specifically.
Sure. So the South Boulder Creek project is not only important to us as a city, but also to the district. And the way the district operates is the South Boulder Creek project would be considered a capital improvement project for the district. So annually, they will contribute funds to projects. And the way they're structured is they're broken up by watershed. So they don't just focus on the city solely in Boulder, but the Boulder Creek watershed, which includes Boulder County, Lafayette, Louisville, a lot of the communities around here. And from a watershed approach is really what they provide to us and helps us coordinate regionally with our partners. And even within that coordination, the South Boulder Creek Flood Mitigation Project and the Boulder watershed still probably the most highly important project within our watershed. And also they are contributing about $6 million of matching funds to the project for us. So they're also financially contributing to it.
Great, thank you both so much. You got my other question too, which was just from a regional perspective, where does this project fit in? But what I heard you say, Joe, is that this is what they consider as a regional entity, one of the most important projects in the region right now. Great, thank you.
Now we have Tara, Matt, Michelle, and Taisha.
Hey, does anybody on city staff want to comment on Kurt CURT's suggestion about the conditional disposal? I'm just wondering if there are any thoughts about that.
Well, yeah, Joe, we want to go first, I'll follow up.
No, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I would say for how we are suggesting lining up this disposal action is that the actual execution that will formalize the transfer from Open Space Department will be conducted through an IDMOU, which will have a number of steps and requirements outlined in the staff recommendation. And so it will be, and if those steps aren't able to be met, then the action doesn't go forward. And so there are a number of requirements that would be in place. And if those, even if the IDMOU is signed and executed, that has other steps that aren't in place yet, if those steps aren't able to be had, such as permitting, then the reversionary clause will come into play, in which essentially the land will come back to open space. So there are a number of conditions or requirements that would be associated for the disposal action.
Great.
Matt, Michelle, Taisha.
Awesome, thanks, Aaron. I've got a couple questions here, but just because and just sort of tie that last piece on, effectively this disposal agreement that we're embarking on is conditional. by the nature of so many of these facets being reversible and the fact that it's contingent on the flood project going through to begin with. So I think all of those facets effectively make this a conditional disposal at face value. So I just want to sort of get the sort of clarity that indeed that's what this is, right?
Yeah, I mean, you would be approving it based on an IDMOU, which will lay out a steps and requirements that would need to be fulfilled.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so I just want to be clear because I don't want people to think that these are apples and oranges when it's kind of apples to apples comparison. I appreciate that. So a couple questions here. Since Dan, since you answered that, I'll stick with you. Does OSMP, because one of the things that I know comes up a lot with regards to disposal and the overall system of open space that we have, the immense complex that we have in the city, the word is the system made whole often comes up a lot in these discussions. And so I just want to ask that, you know, in the transferring of 2.2 acres and in the product of receiving, you know, perhaps 119 acres and water rights, is it the view of staff that and maybe that that the open space system is not only maybe made whole, but is more accurately taking a net positive in the aggregate through this agreement?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Matt. It is difficult to answer. I would say I'm going to answer it in two parts. One is the 2.2 acres right now is a very high quality habitat. The 119 acres is a relatively low quality, being a former gravel line. If it just was that equal exchange of 119 to the 2.2, I probably would be having some heartburn. But the fact that that 119 acres is going to be fully restored and is probably going to be the largest and most ambitious wetland restoration project in the city of Boulder's history, to me, that's where the big benefit to the open space system comes in. And of course, the water rights to help make that ongoing restoration become viable in the long term is really key. So yeah, I would say that there's some big benefits that Bethany outlined in terms of what does this transfer, how does this transfer benefit open space? But I don't want to just overlook the fact that there's heartburn in 2.2 acres of very high quality habitat being lost here. And but the ambitious nature of that mitigation project is certainly an exciting one.
I appreciate that, Dan. There's no doubt that there's certainly some differences in the quality of that open space. And since you brought up the restoration, sort of the follow-up to that is, would OSMP even be in a position to do this really ambitious and perhaps have these immense benefits with regards to restoration of these wetlands if we did not have an annexation agreement with the University of Colorado? Would we even have access and the ability to do that restoration if it weren't for this annexation agreement and this partnership?
Well, I mean, putting my crystal ball hat on, it's not under city's ownership, it's under another owner's, and for decades, that land was not available to the city to be able to do that work. So, I mean, it certainly was a trigger to release land that and otherwise would not be available for us to do that work. We are doing some very large restoration projects on formal gravel ponds upstream in Boulder Creek or downstream in Boulder Creek that provides us with a roadmap for what this area could look like. So some of the notions that this is sort of untested type of mitigation project, we are taking formal gravel areas and restoring them to functioning wetland areas and other places. And to have that opportunity with what will be within the city limits is really a unique opportunity that probably would not have been afforded to us in the short term in any other ways, just because it's under another ownership. It's, you know, we didn't have control over that. So
appreciate it. Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate those responses because those have been sort of issues that have been brought up, as you know well, for some time. I've got just a couple too, and I want to pass, obviously let Michelle and Taisha take a crack at this. But my next questions are for Joe. It's sort of the issue of 500-year and upstream have been brought up. I know that you threw that laundry list of 50-something other proposals and mitigation strategies that had come up. Of those two in particular, could you explain why certainly the 500-year was studied and shown not to be viable? So we can kind of put that to bed in relation to why the option we have is the most viable. Just again, for the record on that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, and thanks for the opportunity to answer that question. And really do appreciate all of the public feedback tonight. But the suggestion that 100-year flood protection in the city of Boulder is inadequate is one that I actually find quite troublesome. With the level of development and as old as the city is, that really is what we can obtain as the highest in a lot of cases. And in some drainages, we can't even get to that level of protection. To answer your direct question, there's a lot of different bases that we cover in utilities, and not every single thing that we do is in my own personal technical wheelhouse, but a lot of this flood project and the hydrology and hydraulics is. And so Brandon and I were working and communicating really closely back in 2000, I want to say 2019, looking at alternatives for different levels of flood protection, 100, 200, and 500, and actually getting into the analysis that the consultants were doing and being able to match existing conditions and not make things worse for other properties downstream is a critical element. It's a fundamental condition. And for those higher levels of flood protection above 100, we can't make that. We can't meet that condition. And so for me, when I saw that, and Brandon and I talked about it, it's technically infeasible. And if we continued to pursue it, we would ultimately run into that issue and wouldn't be able to get it permitted and the approvals that
Appreciate it. Thanks for that answer, Joe. My last question is kind of a 1 and a B. There is, if we were to reject disposal, does this stop CU's ability to develop their agreed upon section of the property in any way?
If you were to stop it for good, and the answer was that there was no disposal, then there wouldn't be a flood project. And so that is a fundamental condition of the conditions of that annexation agreement going into effect. So others may have a different answer or a more nuanced answer, but at first blush, it would be a big barrier to their development plans.
And really the last question in there is, then who is ultimately harmed by not approving this disposal?
Well, so again, other team members may have more to add to this, but our team across departments has been really working hard to think about community input and the different perspectives and feelings on this. And we've really tried to structure this disposal action to give ourselves the most expeditious path to flood protection, but do it in a way that if something unforeseen falls through, and I don't know what that would be because all indications are that we're well positioned with the permitting agencies, there's really no risk to the city because it reverts back to open space. So as one of the lead staff members on that, that's my perspective, but Dan or Teresa or others may have more to add.
I appreciate that, Joe. Yeah, I think certainly it's the 2,300 homes that are downstream that would be certainly most harmed by not pursuing that. But I appreciate the answers. And lastly, I just want to say thank you for all your great work, both Dan, your teams, and Joe and your teams for doing all that. So, and thanks for fielding my questions in response to some of the public testimony. So thank you so much.
Thanks. We got Michelle Montaisha.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Thanks for all the public input and the follow-up questions and answers. Matt, I'm with you. The way the recommendation is structured, it actually sounds like a conditional disposal and is actually pretty similar to the one that Hal Hallstein and I had worked on and proposed a few years ago. But Joe, I have a question about that. So we have a lot of people talking about the timing of requesting disposal, it coming before the permitting. I just would like to understand like what would delaying the request and approval for disposal due to the project's timeline?
Well, if it would add considerable time because we would get to the end of the permitting process, and one of the last permits that we would obtain is the one from the state engineer's office that Brandon described. And just the way their process works, you don't get that until the very end when all of the details are available. So we would normally, if we had the disposal in hand, we would get that permit and others that were coming to fruition at that point of the project. And then we would immediately put it out for bid and go to construction. And so there's so many elements of schedule risk to me if we delay the disposal. And we would have to go through that process. And then, similar to the position we were in with the annexation agreement, what if we start having those disposal discussions and something in that process and what gets approved changes the footprint of the project? Now we have to go back to all of those agencies and work through that with them again. And some of the activities that we are bringing forward here in the first quarter are also subject to a referendum. And so there are those elements if those are pursued by the community. And so it could be a year or more delay, in my opinion. So this is really important to me and the project team that we do this now. The last utilities project that I worked on and had a role on was the Carter Lake Pipeline several years ago. And I apologize if I had made a comparison to that, or if it was me or somebody else and presented an equivalence in habitat. I'm sure we were talking about process, but for that particular project, I kind of went back through my notes as this discussion has been unfolding. And the Open Space Board took action on that disposal in March 2017. And construction on that pipeline actually started in August of 2018. So 16 months later, it was a very similar position we were in there. And so if there are a number of capital projects in the city that the open space is such an asset and it's so important, but we have other projects, transportation, utilities that may need disposals in the future. So I would be really concerned if that became the precedent, that we had to have all of the permits in hand before we could start through this process.
Okay, so to sort of recap that, delaying the disposal process would significantly delay the project timeline, which would delay
Correct.
protection of those 2,300 residents after
Correct.
all of these years. On the other hand, we do have the ability to reverse it if we don't get those permits.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And we've structured it that way by design.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Also, Joe, and I know that you had mentioned and showed us those 3 spreadsheets of the 58 different alternatives that you all had considered. In your wildest estimations, could you ballpark how many staff hours that would have taken you?
Well, fortunately, because it went
Wildest.
back to 73, I would have been 5 years old. So I didn't have an engineering license and didn't have a role in all of those. But I can't even venture a guess. I will say the capital projects we have across all 3 utilities, water, wastewater, storm, and flood. And I think I'm in my 18th year at the city. I've seen some that have been long duration in approvals, but I have never seen anything to this magnitude of even the position we're in now, the number of staff hours and the amount of public process that we have done. So I can't even venture a guess.
It's amazing. I know I've only been part of the board since 2021, and I know it's been a lot of hours. I have a question for Dan and Bethany that addresses community member Laura Tyler's comments about the precedent of disposing open space lands for the purposes of health and safety. She had mentioned a particular instance and was wondering if you could validate that and perhaps enlighten us on other cases that we've disposed OSMP lands for the purposes of health and safety.
Yeah, I'll start off and then I'll let Bethany chime in. Bethany is with our head of our real estate area, which is the one that coordinates the disposal requests that come in. So she probably would have her fingers at some of the details. But yeah, it is not. First, I would say that the reason that there's disposal language in our charter is probably the folks that had a vision for what this program realized that we are in a urban wildland interface. You know, we have over 100 miles of open space that butt up against some form of development, which is then we have a number of different utility rights and ditch easements and utility easements across our system. So to think that we could just be sort of null and void of any disposal requests is wishful thinking. In fact, that on average, the board and the council and the staff administer and consider probably 3 to 4 disposal requests on average in a given year. Some are very minor, and occasionally there's some big ones like this. And there has been occasion where there's been some big ones that have to do with health, life, and safety. Carter Lake Pipeline was one. We had a big one down in El Dorado Springs Drive regarding disposing of lands for the construction of a rural fire district presence and office, one for a wastewater treatment plant. There's been some roadway safety improvements which required disposals of open space. So it is not unusual for health and safety related disposal requests to come our way. I think what we want to do is treat these consistently to make sure we're really assessing what the impacts are, to making sure that alternatives were fully vetted, and to actually look at what possible benefits there are to the open space whenever we have a disposal request that comes our way. So Bethany, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I think you pretty much covered it. I will, I do know the one you were just asking about, Michelle, and that Dan mentioned for the Rocky Mountain Fire station in El Dorado, or on El Dorado Springs Drive. It actually was in existence when we acquired that property. It wasn't a disposal to construct it, but it was a disposal to resolve the fact that there was a fire station, which is not an open space purpose and not an improvement that would usually be required, allowed under our charter, our open space charter language, to continue on that property. So the property did have to be disposed to allow that very important public safety facility to continue to exist out there. But I think Dan did cover a lot of the good examples we have that would be similar to this example.
Thanks, that's really helpful. I think there are about 7 examples of that. And if we can get additional details by the March meeting, that would be helpful. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks. Now, Taisha.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the questions and comments from community. And I wanted to, actually, one of my questions, Michelle, was around the permitting process rationale. And as somebody who's coming swiftly off of the Commission for Colorado Parks and Wildlife and was in a similar situation regarding the wolf reintroduction, there was a lot of planning that needed to happen before some of the permits could be done. And so it was really helpful, Joe, to hear some of those rationales, and particularly the one that stood out for me the most was expediting opportunities to mitigate for the 20, for all of the community members that are currently exposed in ways. And again, I was here in 2012, 2013. So, but I did have another question or comment, a question related to some of the comments that came from public comment, and that was just around the emergency response planning and scenario planning, and just wanted to lift up and would love to hear, be reminded of the collaboration with the emergency response team, and both in the different scenario planning, the rescue plans. Just love to hear a little bit more about that, especially since that was a concern brought up in a couple of different ways. Thank you.
Sure, I can start with that. And when we were talking about the project prioritization, I mentioned a 2022 comprehensive flood plan. It was 2 volumes, and a big part of that was emergency response, as well as information for the community on how individuals can prepare their own property and important documents and things like that. And we worked really closely with Mike Chard and at the director of our Emergency Operations Center in developing that content. We were developing that plan at unfortunately the same time that the Marshall Fire was happening, and so there was a lot of information and question about how people could sign up for emergency alerts. And as that information was coming out, we were building that into the plan. And then in our department, we have a number of drinking water dams and reservoirs for water supply, and we're already under state regulations and jurisdictions. And there are so many different scenarios that we run through drills, not just our department, but we work with Mike and his team, and we run through drills around drinking water quality or a dam event or a flood event or fires and things like that. And we actually get people in the room and do functional exercises. And so I do think the 2013 flood and things like the Marshall Fire do show us some things that we need to work on, and we build on those things and run through drills and practice them.
Thank you so much.
Joe, sorry to interrupt, Tanisha. I just I have a special place in my heart for emergency preparedness, and I did just want to highlight, we have heard this comment throughout this process and some of the things we've been doing as a utility to help respond to that. So the first one is US 36 is a major roadway. So the greatest risk to life safety, and another reason why the project's so important, is most people that die in flooding are typically in vehicles. And so US 36 being such a major roadway, that really flagged this as a high priority project for us, as well as an evacuation and emergency access route in a flood, having that be accessible to the city. The next thing was we did install a camera upstream of US 36 near the CU Boulder warehouse to try and visualize the floodplain and give us, we found cameras very valuable during the 2013 flood to be able to view flooding areas that we weren't able to reach because roads were washed out or things like that. So that's something we have done in response to some of those concerns from the community. I do want to address sirens. So there are sirens located in the area. Sirens are not meant for people in their homes. They're meant for people that are recreating outdoors. So I always like to clarify that point to the public, that if you do hear a siren while you're outside, it means get to higher ground immediately. And those sirens, you may hear them indoors, but they're not meant to be heard indoors. The best way to stay informed in a flash flood situation is to go to BOCO 911 and sign up, and you'll get emergency alerts immediately as they're issued. We've also incorporated the Everbridge system, which is, that is the Everbridge system. That's what I meant right there. And then lastly, as community members, we do consider the community as part of our flood response. And if you go to boulderfloodinfo.net, you can find resources as a private property owner for how to be prepared, and also insurance requirements, things to do before a flood, during a flood, and after a flood. So I would just encourage people to go use those resources. So just wanted to, it was a good opportunity to just kind of highlight those for the community as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Taisha. Now we have Harmon.
Yeah, so Brandon, you just brought up something that I've been thinking of since Hal Hallstein mentioned the issue of equity and asked the question, why save this neighborhood instead of other neighborhoods, and listening to you talk about the critical nature of protecting Route 36 from overtopping, gave me a thought about why this, beyond the 58 studies that Joe referred to, and time I spent on planning board doing guiding principles and looking at this the first time around, and well, the fifth time around. So just with all that as a backdrop, could you or somebody else from staff talk a little bit about the selection of this and in an equity lens, through an equity lens?
Yes, I can, and I'll give Joe first stab if he would like to answer that question. But we did, our comprehensive flood and stormwater master plan was updated in 2022 and approved by city council, and we did a lot of community feedback, a lot of community engagement to get the criteria for how to rank these projects across drainage ways. So we have 16 major drainage ways in the city, and each drainage way mitigation plan is specific to the people in the neighborhoods in those drainage ways. So it's very difficult to compare those across drainage ways for us as a utility to define what project is the next project we need to implement. So life safety was obviously a very high criteria, which includes transportation routes, structures in the high hazard zone, structures in the 100-year floodplain. There's also effectiveness of how many structures the project would remove. And those were the top two criteria. And then the third criteria was actually equity, which we use a social vulnerability index for. And that's a census-based metric. And it really gave us some quantifiable data that we were able to evaluate across the city to make sure. And it actually did change how the results would have come out from the historic analysis of just looking at how much money you spend and how much benefit you get back out in a dollars, which we found to not be the most equitable way to evaluate projects. So those are the criteria. There's more criteria beyond that, but those are the three main criteria that we're ranking projects on right now.
Thanks a lot for that explanation.
Taisha, did you have another question? No? Okay.
No, I thought I put my hand down. My apologies.
No worries. And Harmon, was that all?
Sorry, I'm not used to using the hands. I should put mine down too. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, great. All right, last call for any other follow-up questions. All right, seeing none, as we mentioned, we're not deliberating tonight, so our next step would be to continue the hearing separately for the Open Space Board and for City Council. So, Dave, if you would like to maybe look for a motion to continue your meeting.
Thank you, Aaron. I want to reiterate again that we will not be taking any further public testimony at the March 13th Open Space Board of Trustees meeting. We will be considering and deliberating on the information that we have received and making a decision at that time to then forward to City Council. So there will be a public comment period at open comment for the board meeting, but this item will not have any further public comment. So I would entertain a motion to continue the public hearing. And Michelle, if you are willing to do that, that'd be great.
I'd be happy to. I move to continue the public hearing to the next regular Open Space Board of Trustees meeting on March 13th, 2024.
I'll second that.
Thank you for the motion and the second. I will call the roll for the vote. Board Member Zuckerman?
Yay.
Board Member Estrella?
Yes.
Board Member Carroll?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So that's a unanimous vote for the Open Space Board to continue the hearing to the March 13th Open Space Board of Trustees public meeting. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Dave. And then I would invite a similar motion from a member of the City Council.
I'll make a motion to continue our public hearing till a date certain of March 21st council meeting.
Second. Third.
I've got a motion, a second. Nicole, looks like we just got beaten to that one. And Alicia, can I do a show of hands on this one?
Yes, sir, you can.
All right, let's have a show of hands. All in favor? Okay, that looks like everybody. So that passes unanimously, and the public hearing is continued to March 21st. Okay, well, let me just say, OSBT members, it's been a delight to have you with us here this evening. Thanks for your service and all of your attention to this matter. We very much look forward to your deliberations on March 13th and receiving your decision and recommendation. And again, a huge thank you to all the staff who did such an amazing job tonight and have done such a phenomenal job on this project for so many years.
And we appreciate all of the public comment as well.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and gavel is closed at 9:05 p.m. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.